My name is Elaine Carter, and I never thought I'd be in this position. The voicemail from my brother Robert just finished playing, his voice cracking as he begged for my help. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the callback button, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. 6 years ago, when my daughter Lucy was fighting for her life and I couldn't afford her treatment, Robert and his wife Diana had laughed in my face. "We have a wedding to plan," Diana had said dismissively, as if my 13-year-old daughter's life was an inconvenience, an unwelcome intrusion on their perfect social calendar. Now here they were, facing foreclosure on their $1 million home, desperate for the financial help that only I could provide. Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it? I'm a financial advisor now, quite successful actually, with more than enough funds to save their home. But as I sit here in my office, memories flooding back, I can still hear Diana's cold laughter echoing in my ears. I can still feel the sting of humiliation as they turned me away at their country club, whispering that some people just can't manage their lives properly. My daughter Lucy, now a healthy, vibrant 19-year-old, walked into my home office with a curious look. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know how to explain to her that the ghosts of our past had returned, hat in hand, begging for mercy. As I stared at Robert's name on my phone screen, I wondered what kind of person I had become. Would I help the brother who refused to help save my daughter? Or would I finally have my moment of vindication? The irony wasn't lost on me that I now held their financial future in my hands, just as they once held Lucy's life in theirs. 6 years ago, my life looked completely different. I was newly divorced from Lucy's father, who had decided that family life wasn't exciting enough, and ran off with his 23-year-old secretary to find himself in the Bahamas. The divorce left me financially strained but determined to create a good life for Lucy and myself. We moved from our spacious suburban house to a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, and I took a job as an administrative assistant at a local investment firm. The pay wasn't great, but it had potential for growth, and the hours allowed me to be home when Lucy returned from school. Despite our modest circumstances, we were happy. We had movie nights with homemade popcorn, took walks in the park, and spent weekends hunting for treasures at thrift stores. Lucy never complained about wearing secondhand clothes or not having the latest gadgets. She was mature beyond her 13 years, with a bright smile that could light up a room and a compassionate heart that made me proud every day. Then came the fatigue. At first, I thought it was just teenage growing pains, or maybe the stress of adjusting to our new life. But when Lucy developed a persistent fever and mysterious rashes, I knew something was wrong. After weeks of tests and specialist referrals, we received the diagnosis, a rare autoimmune condition that was attacking Lucy's major organs. The doctor, a kindly woman with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes, explained that Lucy needed an experimental treatment that wasn't covered by our insurance. "It costs about $175,000, she said apologetically, as if she personally set the price. "But without it, Lucy's prognosis is—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I saw the grim reality in her eyes. That night, after tucking Lucy into bed with promises that everything would be okay, I sat at our tiny kitchen table and mapped out a plan. I took on a second job waiting tables at night while Lucy slept. I organized fundraisers at local businesses, applied for medical grants, and even started a crowdfunding campaign. I approached banks for loans, but with my post-divorce credit score and modest income, I was denied repeatedly. After 3 months of exhausting every avenue and watching Lucy grow weaker by the day, I had managed to raise only $32,000, not even a quarter of what we needed. It was then that I thought of my brother Robert. 2 years older than me, Robert had always been the successful sibling. While I had pursued a teaching degree before becoming a stay-at-home mom, Robert had gone into real estate development and made a fortune during the housing boom. He lived in a mansion in the exclusive part of town with his wife Diana, a former beauty queen with expensive tastes and a razor-sharp tongue. They had one daughter, Melissa, who was 23 and engaged to the son of a prominent local judge. We weren't close, but surely, I thought, blood would count for something. Surely they wouldn't let Lucy die when they had more money than they knew what to do with. With hope in my heart and desperation in my soul, I decided to swallow my pride and ask my brother for help. Robert and I had been close once, building forts in our backyard and protecting each other from neighborhood bullies. When our parents died in a car accident during our college years, we'd grieved together, sorting through family photos and splitting the modest inheritance. But things changed when he met Diana at a charity gala. Diana came from old money and had definite ideas about who belonged in their social circle. Gradually, Robert's calls became less frequent, and our family dinners dwindled to obligatory holiday appearances where Diana would subtly criticize everything from my cooking to my parenting. After my divorce, the distance grew even wider. Diana made it clear that failure was contagious, and she didn't want Melissa influenced by our situation. Still, Lucy was Robert's only niece, and despite everything, I believed he would help us. I spent hours preparing for the conversation, practicing how to explain Lucy's condition without sounding like I was begging, even though that's exactly what I was about to do. I put on my best outfit, a navy blue dress I'd worn to job interviews, and drove to their sprawling estate with my heart in my throat. Their housekeeper, a tight-lipped woman named Mrs. Everett, led me through the marble-floored foyer to a sunroom, where Robert and Diana were enjoying brunch. Diana's eyes narrowed slightly at my unexpected appearance, while Robert looked up from his newspaper with mild surprise. "Elaine, this is unexpected. Is everything okay?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. I perched on the edge of an antique chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and told them about Lucy's diagnosis. I showed them the medical reports, explained the treatment, and finally, with my voice shaking, asked if they could help with the remaining $143,000. "It's her only chance," I said, unable to keep the desperation from my voice. "The doctors say we're running out of time." Robert and Diana exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Robert cleared his throat. "Elaine, I'm so sorry about Lucy, truly I am. But we've just put down a deposit on the Westlake property development. Our assets are tied up at the moment." Diana nodded sympathetically, though her eyes remained cold. "And we've just started planning Melissa's wedding," she added, as if that explained everything. "It's going to be the social event of the year. The Andersons, the Blakes, everyone who's anyone will be there." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand. Maybe just a portion then? Anything would help at this point." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Let us look at our finances and get back to you, okay?" I left their mansion with cautious optimism. Surely once they reviewed their accounts, they'd find a way to help their only niece. But days passed with no word from Robert. When I called, Mrs. Everett informed me that they were out looking at wedding venues with Melissa. A week later, I received a text message from Robert. "Elaine, we've reviewed everything and unfortunately can't help right now. Maybe try one of those online fundraisers. Diana says they're quite effective." That same evening, Diana posted photos on social media of them touring the Grand Lakeside Hotel, captioned, "Possible wedding venue for our princess. Nothing but the best for our Melissa. Wire blessed barn dream wedding." The venue rental alone, I later learned, cost $50,000 for a single day. Lucy's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next few weeks. Her once vibrant auburn hair fell out in clumps, her skin became so pale it was almost translucent, and dark circles formed permanent residences under her once bright blue eyes. The hospital became our second home, with Lucy requiring more frequent stays as her kidneys struggled to function. I watched helplessly as nurses hooked her up to dialysis machines, the whirring and beeping of medical equipment providing the soundtrack to our nightmare. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves, covering our kitchen table in an overwhelming blanket of financial obligations. I received collection notices and threatening calls from billing departments while sitting beside Lucy's hospital bed, trying to hide my growing panic behind reassuring smiles. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart," I'd tell her, stroking her thinning hair while mentally calculating how many more waitressing shifts I'd need to work to cover the latest round of tests. My crowdfunding campaign had stalled at $45,000, far short of our goal. Local news coverage brought a brief surge of donations, but public interest waned as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the next tragic story. I sold everything of value from our apartment, from my wedding ring to the antique bookcase my grandmother had left me. I pawned my car and started taking the bus, adding hours to my commute between jobs. I even considered bankruptcy, spending late nights researching whether it would affect Lucy's ongoing care or jeopardize our access to what treatment we could afford. Desperation drove me to make another attempt with Robert and Diana. This time, I didn't call ahead. I drove to their house in a borrowed car and waited in the driveway until Robert returned from work. His expression when he saw me standing there was a mixture of annoyance and guilt. "Elaine, this isn't a good time," he said, glancing nervously at the house where Diana might be watching. "Lucy's dying, Robert," I said bluntly, too exhausted for social niceties. "The doctors are giving her months, maybe weeks. I need your help, please." Robert's face softened momentarily before his features rearranged themselves into a mask of practiced concern. "I understand you're worried, but Diana and I simply can't right now. The wedding plans are in full swing and we've committed to covering everything. It's what Melissa deserves." "And what does Lucy deserve?" I asked, my voice breaking. "To die because her cousin needs a fairy tale wedding?" Robert's expression hardened. "You're being dramatic, Elaine. These experimental treatments, they're not guaranteed anyway. And frankly, it seems like poor financial planning on your part to not have better insurance or savings for emergencies." Before I could respond, Diana appeared in the doorway, her slim figure silhouetted against the warm light from inside their mansion. "Robert, who are you talking to?" she called, though I was certain she could see exactly who it was. Robert straightened his shoulders. "Just Elaine, dear. She was just leaving." Diana stepped outside, her designer heels clicking on the paved driveway. "Elaine, really, this constant asking is becoming inappropriate. We've told you we can't help. Right now. I'm sorry about Lucy, but perhaps you should be looking into comfort care instead of chasing expensive treatments." I stood there, stunned by her coldness, as she took Robert's arm and guided him inside, closing the door on me and my dying daughter without a backward glance. 1 week later, driven by maternal desperation and the sight of Lucy hooked to yet another machine, I made my final attempt. I discovered through social media that Robert, Diana, and their wedding planning committee were meeting at Oak Ridge Country Club to finalize catering details for Melissa's reception. The exclusive club, with its manicured lawns and marble columns, represented everything I couldn't provide for Lucy. I didn't have an appointment or a membership, but I managed to convince the receptionist that I was meeting my brother for an urgent family matter. Dressed in my work clothes, having come straight from my administrative job, I felt painfully out of place among the designer outfits and casual displays of wealth. I found them on the terrace overlooking the golf course, champagne flutes in hand, laughing with the wedding planner and caterer over a table spread with sample menus and floral arrangements. Diana spotted me first, her smile freezing on her face like a cracking porcelain mask. "Elaine," she said, her voice carrying a warning that everyone at the table immediately sensed. "What are you doing here?" I approached the table acutely, aware of the curious stares from the wedding professionals and club members at nearby tables. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I began, my rehearsed speech suddenly lodged in my throat. "Robert, Diana, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't our last option. Lucy's doctor called this morning. Her kidneys are failing. If we don't start the treatment within 2 weeks, I couldn't finish the sentence. Robert at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with the now silent wedding planner. Diana, however, placed her champagne flute down with deliberate slowness and stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "Elaine," she said, her voice dripping with condescension and barely concealed anger, "this is completely inappropriate. We've already told you we can't help. We have a wedding to plan." She gestured at the scattered samples. "This venue alone is costing us a small fortune. Melissa deserves her special day." "And Lucy deserves to live," I countered, fighting to keep my voice steady. "She's 13 years old, Diana. Your niece." An uncomfortable silence fell over the terrace. From the corner of my eye, I could see people at nearby tables pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Diana's face flushed with either embarrassment or anger, possibly both. "Your poor planning isn't our emergency," she said, her words precise and cutting. "Maybe if you had made better choices in life, you wouldn't be in this situation." "Robert, finally spoke up, though his voice lacked conviction. Diana, maybe we could. Diana silenced him with a look. No, Robert, we've discussed this. We simply don't have it in our budget right now. Then, unbelievably, she laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through me like a knife. I mean, really, Elaine? $175,000? Do you have any idea what Melissa's wedding is costing us? We can't just divert funds because you've suddenly decided your daughter needs some experimental treatment that probably won't even work. The wedding planner and caterer exchanged uncomfortable glances, gathering their materials as if sensing the meeting was effectively over. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, publicly humiliated and utterly defeated. She's your family, I whispered. Your blood. Robert couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at his hands. Diana's face showed no compassion, only irritation at the scene I was causing. Security, she called to a uniformed man who had been hovering nearby since the conversation took a turn. My sister-in-law was just leaving. As the security guard gently but firmly escorted me through the country club, I could hear Diana's voice behind me, carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. Some people just can't manage their lives properly, she was saying to the table, always looking for handouts instead of solutions. The guard, perhaps taking pity on me, pretended not to notice my sobs as he walked me to my car. That night in the hospital was the darkest of my life. Lucy had been admitted with kidney failure, her small body swallowed up by the adult-sized hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that were now doing the work her organs couldn't manage. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across her sunken cheeks, and the constant beeping of monitors provided a grim rhythm to our vigil. I hadn't slept properly in days, dozing fitfully in the vinyl hospital chair that had become my bed, waking at every change in Lucy's breathing or machine alerts. Dr. Patel had been direct during his morning rounds, his kind eyes unable to soften the blow of his words. Without the specialized treatment, we're looking at complete system failure within weeks, maybe days, he had said quietly, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Ms. Carter, but we need to make some decisions about comfort care. Soon. The finality of his words had hollowed me out, leaving nothing but an empty shell of a mother who had failed her child in the most fundamental way. I couldn't save her. After all the extra shifts, the fundraisers, the begging, I had failed. I held Lucy's limp hand in mine, her skin cool and dry, and watched her labored breathing, counting each rise and fall of her chest like precious gems. I must have finally succumbed to exhaustion because I woke with a start when someone touched my shoulder. Elaine? Elaine Carter? I blinked up at a nurse I didn't recognize, momentarily disoriented. Yes, I managed, quickly looking at Lucy, to make sure nothing had changed. The nurse, a woman about my age with curly black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, smiled at me. I thought it was you. I'm Clara Jimenez. We were in Professor Denning's economics class together at State. It took my exhausted brain a moment to place her. Clara? Oh my God, it's been 15 years? She nodded, checking Lucy's IV and making notes on her chart. At least, I saw your name on the patient roster and had to come see if it was really you. Her eyes softened as she looked at Lucy. I've been reading her file. I'm so sorry about her condition. I nodded, too tired for the usual social platitudes. Clara worked efficiently around Lucy, adjusting monitors and checking readings with practiced hands. I actually work part-time with the Henderson Medical Research Foundation, she said casually as she recorded Lucy's vitals. They fund clinical trials for rare conditions, including autoimmune disorders like Lucy's. I straightened in my chair, fully awake now. Clinical trials? For Lucy's condition? Clara nodded. The foundation just approved a new round of patient funding for exactly the treatment Lucy needs. It wouldn't cover everything, but it could cover a significant portion. My heart, which had been dormant with despair just moments before, flickered to life with a dangerous spark of hope. How significant? Potentially up to 70%, Clara said. But the application period closes tomorrow and they select patients immediately after. The treatment starts next week for those accepted. What followed was a blur of activity. Clara helped me complete the application during her breaks, explaining medical terminology and suggesting the most impactful Ways to present Lucy's case. We submitted it minutes before the midnight deadline, and then began the agonizing wait. 3 days later, we received the news. Lucy had been accepted into the program. The foundation would cover $125,000 of the treatment cost, leaving us to find the remaining $50,000. It was still an enormous sum, but compared to the original amount, it suddenly seemed within reach. Dr. Patel, encouraged by this development, agreed to begin preliminary treatment while we secured the remaining funds. But where would I find $50,000 in a matter of days? I had sold everything of value, maxed out every credit card, and exhausted all conventional loan options. Then I remembered my mother's house, the modest 3-bedroom home where Robert and I had grown up. After our parents' death, we had rented it out, splitting the modest income. Eventually, Robert had wanted to sell it to invest in one of his development projects, but I had refused, feeling it was our last connection to our parents. He had bought out his half, leaving me as sole owner of a property worth approximately $60,000 in its current condition. It was my only inheritance, the only thing I had to pass on to Lucy someday. But what good was an inheritance if she wasn't alive to receive it? The decision was painful but clear. The house went on the market the next day, listed well below value for a quick sale. Selling my childhood home felt like ripping out a piece of my soul, but I signed the papers without hesitation, watching through blurred vision as my signature transferred ownership of the last physical connection to my parents to a young couple, expecting their first child. The realtor handed me a check for $58,000, and I drove straight to the hospital to make the final payment for Lucy's treatment. The first weeks of treatment were terrifying. Lucy's body, already weakened by months of illness, initially rebelled against the aggressive therapy. There were nights I sat by her bed, watching her temperature spike to alarming levels, praying to a God I wasn't sure I still believed in to spare my daughter. During one particularly frightening episode where Lucy's blood pressure dropped dangerously low, I found myself making bargains with the universe, promising anything in exchange for her survival. I worked myself to exhaustion, maintaining my administrative job during the day and continuing to wait tables 3 nights a week to cover our ongoing expenses. Our apartment was rarely used except for quick showers and occasional changes of clothes, as I spent every possible moment at the hospital. My boss at the investment firm, Mr. Harrington, showed unexpected compassion, allowing me flexible hours and occasionally dropping by the hospital with homemade meals from his wife. Other parents in the pediatric ward formed an impromptu support group, watching each other's children during bathroom breaks or coffee runs, sharing resources and small kindnesses that kept us all afloat in our ocean of worry. Meanwhile, through the disconnected lens of social media, I caught glimpses of Robert and Diana's world continuing unaffected by our struggle. Diana posted weekly updates about Melissa's wedding preparations, each more extravagant than the last. There were fittings at exclusive bridal salons, tastings at 5-star restaurants, and consultations with florists who charged more for centerpieces than my monthly rent. One evening, while Lucy dozed after a particularly difficult treatment session, I scrolled through my phone to find Diana had shared photos of Melissa's bachelorette weekend in Paris, complete with champagne cruises on the Seine and private shopping excursions. The contrast between our realities was so stark it was almost laughable, a cosmic joke without a punchline. 3 months into Lucy's treatment, an elegant cream envelope arrived at our apartment, addressed in gold calligraphy. Inside was an invitation to Melissa's wedding, scheduled for the following month at the Grand Lakeside Hotel. A handwritten note from Diana was tucked inside. "We hope you and Lucy can attend. The registry information is enclosed. Despite our differences, family should be present for such occasions." I stared at the note, unable to process the breathtaking insensitivity it represented. They hadn't once visited Lucy in the hospital, hadn't called to check on her progress, yet expected us to celebrate their daughter's special day and bring a gift from their curated registry, where the lowest-priced item was a $300 serving platter. That night, sitting beside Lucy's hospital bed as she slept peacefully for the first time in months, her color slightly improved and her breathing steady, I tore the invitation into tiny pieces and let them fall into the trash bin like confetti, a private celebration of choosing my daughter over toxic family ties. 1 year later, Lucy sat on the edge of the examination table, swinging her legs impatiently as Dr. Patel reviewed her latest test results. At 14, she was still thin, but her cheeks had regained their healthy color and her hair had grown, back thicker than before, falling in auburn waves past her shoulders. "These numbers look remarkable," Dr. Patel said, genuine pleasure lighting his tired eyes. "Your kidney function is nearly normal, and your inflammatory markers are the lowest they've been since diagnosis. I think we can officially say the treatment was successful." Lucy's whoop of joy brought tears to my eyes as she launched herself at me for a hug, nearly toppling us both in her enthusiasm. We celebrated with ice cream at her favorite parlor, making plans for her return to school full-time after over a year of hospital visits and home tutoring. Life was slowly rebuilding itself around us piece by fragile piece. I had continued working at the investment firm, gradually taking on more responsibilities as I demonstrated an unexpected aptitude for financial planning. My background in teaching, combined with my personal experience navigating medical financial systems, gave me a unique perspective that clients appreciated. One afternoon, I was summoned to Mr. Harrington's office, certain I was about to be reprimanded for missing a deadline while taking Lucy to a follow-up appointment. Instead, I found him sitting with an elegantly dressed woman he introduced as Victoria Reynolds, a partner at Reynolds Wealth Management, one of the city's premier financial advisory firms. "Elaine," Mr. Harrington said, "Ms. Reynolds is looking for someone with your specific skills for their new family financial planning division." Victoria smiled warmly at me. "Thomas has told me about your remarkable journey and how you've managed to navigate an incredibly complex medical financial situation. We need advisors who understand real-world challenges, not just theoretical. Portfolio management." The job offer came with a salary that made me lightheaded, benefits that would fully cover Lucy's ongoing care, and a clear path to certification as a financial advisor. I accepted on the spot, my hand shaking as I signed the preliminary paperwork. That same week, I received a text from a former neighbor near my childhood home. She had spotted Robert driving through the old neighborhood, slowing down near what used to be our parents' house. I didn't think much of it at the time, focused instead on our new beginning. Lucy thrived upon returning to school, her experience giving her a maturity and perspective that drew others to her. She started a support group for teens dealing with chronic illnesses, using her story to inspire others facing similar battles. At home, we moved from our cramped apartment to a modest but comfortable townhouse closer to my new office and Lucy's school. Over the next 5 years, I excelled in my new career, developing a specialty in helping families prepare financially for medical crises. I completed my certification as a financial advisor and began building my own client portfolio, many referred by doctors and nurses who had treated Lucy. My experience had taught me to spot potential financial pitfalls that other advisors might miss, and clients appreciated my practical, empathetic approach to their concerns. Meanwhile, through casual conversations with former colleagues and occasional glimpses on social media, I became peripherally aware that Robert's business empire was showing cracks. The economic downturn had hit luxury real estate particularly hard, and several of his developments had stalled or been canceled entirely. Diana's social media posts became less frequent and more subdued, the lavish vacations and shopping sprees replaced by carefully staged family dinners and nostalgic throwbacks to better times. When Lucy received her college acceptance letter, along with a substantial merit scholarship, it felt like the final validation of our journey, proof that we had not only survived but thrived despite everything thrown our way. Standing in our kitchen, watching my healthy, confident daughter dance around with her acceptance letter, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. We had made it, without help from those who should have been our strongest supporters, and that knowledge gave me a quiet strength that no luxury or social status could ever provide. The irony of Robert's voicemail arriving on the same day as Lucy's 19th birthday wasn't lost on me. 6 years had passed since I'd last spoken to my brother. 6 years of building a new life from the ashes of our old one. Lucy was thriving in her sophomore year of college, majoring in pre-med with plans to become a pediatric specialist. I had been promoted to senior financial advisor at Reynolds Wealth Management, with my own office and a robust client list that kept me comfortably busy. The desperate tone in Robert's voice was so unfamiliar that I played the message twice to make sure it was really him. "Elaine, it's Robert. I know it's been a long time, and I have no right to ask, but I need to talk to you. It's urgent. We're about to lose everything. Please call me back." My finger hovered over the delete button before curiosity got the better of me. I didn't call immediately, instead spending my evening celebrating Lucy's birthday with a small gathering of her friends at our favorite restaurant. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked up Robert's company online. What I found confirmed the hints I'd gathered over the years. Robert Carter Properties was facing multiple lawsuits from investors, had laid off most of its staff, and according to business news sources, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Further research revealed that their mansion had been listed for sale months ago and was still on the market, now with a significantly reduced asking price. Their social media accounts told a different story, with Diana still posting carefully curated images of dinner parties and charity events, maintaining the illusion of prosperity even as it crumbled around them. Professional curiosity drove me to dig deeper, using the financial analysis skills I'd developed over the years. Robert's company had made a series of increasingly risky investments, leveraging existing properties to finance new developments just before the market turned. When buyers pulled out of the luxury properties, the house of cards had begun to collapse. They had remortgaged their home to pump money into the failing business, and now, according to county records, foreclosure proceedings had begun. I finally returned Robert's call 3 days later, arranging to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, a neutral territory for what would undoubtedly be an uncomfortable conversation. I arrived early, securing a corner table that offered some privacy. Robert entered 10 minutes late, nearly unrecognizable from the confident, polished businessman I remembered. His hair had grayed considerably, deep lines etched around his mouth, and eyes and his designer suit, once impeccably tailored, hung loosely on his frame. Diana followed behind him, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the strain of recent years. They hesitated when they saw me, perhaps surprised that I had actually come, before making their way to the table. "Thank you for meeting us," Robert began, his voice subdued. "I know we have no right to ask anything of you." Diana nodded stiffly, her eyes darting around the coffee shop as if worried someone might recognize them in their moment of humiliation. I waited silently, forcing them to continue. Robert cleared his throat, uncomfortable with my silence. "The thing is, Elaine, we're in trouble. Serious trouble." He explained what I had already discovered through my research: failed investments, mounting debts, the impending foreclosure. "We've tried everything," Diana interjected, her voice lacking its former imperious tone. "Loans, investors, even selling most of our assets." "The bank is foreclosing in 30 days, Robert continued. "We need about $200,000 to stop the proceedings and restructure our debt." The irony of the amount, so close to what I had once begged them for, hung in the air between us. "We thought maybe, given your position at Reynolds, you might be able to help with a loan, or perhaps investment advice," Robert finished lamely. Diana, perhaps sensing the futility of their position, added with uncharacteristic humility, "We know we have no right to ask, especially after everything. But we're desperate, Elaine. We have nowhere else to turn." Her carefully maintained facade cracked, tears welling in her eyes as she whispered, "We spent everything on appearances. The cars, the vacations, Melissa's wedding, all to maintain our social standing. We have nothing left, nothing but debts and regrets." The coffee between us grew cold as I sat in silence, absorbing their request and the stunning reversal of our positions. My first instinct, born from years of buried hurt, was vindication, a sharp satisfaction at seeing them humbled by circumstances of their own making. 6 years ago, they had laughed at my desperation as I begged for my daughter's life. Now they sat before me, begging for a financial lifeline I had the power to provide or withhold. The symmetry was almost poetic. I excused myself, stepping outside the coffee shop to call Lucy. Despite being in the middle of exam preparations, she answered immediately. "Everything okay, Mom?" Her voice, strong and vibrant, was a reminder of everything we'd overcome together. I explained the situation in measured terms, not wanting to influence her with my own complicated emotions. "What do you think I should do?" I asked finally. "They refuse to help save your life, Lucy. Why should I help save their house?" There was a long pause before Lucy responded, her words carrying a wisdom beyond her 19 years. "Mom, their actions showed who they are. Your actions will show who you are. Whatever you decide, don't let it be about revenge. That would give them power over you they don't deserve. Her simple insight cut through my conflicted emotions like a beam of light through darkness. When I returned to the table, Robert and Diana watched me anxiously, clearly expecting rejection. "I won't give you a loan," I said finally, watching. Their faces fall. "But I will help you, on my terms." I proceeded to outline a structured arrangement. I would negotiate with their bank using my professional contacts to halt the immediate foreclosure. I would help them develop a realistic financial recovery plan, including downsizing to a home they could actually afford and restructuring Robert's business to focus on sustainable projects rather than luxury developments. In exchange, they would attend financial counseling sessions with me, follow a strict budget, and most importantly, volunteer regularly at the children's hospital where Lucy had received her treatment. "You need to understand what families go through when medical disasters strike," I explained. "You need to see what real problems look like, not just social inconveniences." Diana's initial resistance was visible in her tightened jaw, but Robert placed a restraining hand on her arm. "We accept your terms," he said quietly. "All of them. And Elaine. I'm sorry. We should have helped Lucy. There hasn't been a day I haven't regretted our decision." Diana's apology came more reluctantly, but perhaps more honestly for that. "I was so focused on appearances, on what people would think," she admitted. "I couldn't see past Melissa's wedding to what really mattered. Watching our world collapse has been educational." Over the following months, I worked with them professionally, maintaining emotional boundaries while helping them rebuild their financial foundation. True to my word, I used my connections to halt the foreclosure and negotiate more favorable terms with their creditors. Robert proved surprisingly adaptable, embracing a more modest business model focused on affordable housing developments that actually thrived in the changing economic climate. Diana struggled more with their reduced circumstances but found unexpected fulfillment in her hospital volunteer work, eventually becoming a patient advocate for families navigating medical financial systems. Our personal relationship thawed gradually, beginning with awkward family dinners that evolved into more comfortable gatherings. Lucy, with her remarkable capacity for forgiveness, helped bridge the gap, sharing stories of her college experiences and medical ambitions. When she invited Robert and Diana to her white coat ceremony 2 years later, their genuine pride in her accomplishments felt like the closing of a painful chapter in our family history. One evening, as Lucy and I sat on the porch of our home watching the sunset, she asked me if I regretted helping Robert and Diana after what they'd done. "No," I answered truthfully. "Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to do it for myself, to know that hardship hadn't hardened me beyond recognition." Lucy nodded, understanding without further explanation. "You know what I've learned from all this, Mom?" she said, leaning her head against my shoulder like she used to do as a child. "Sometimes the people who refuse to give you a lifeline are the ones who end up needing it most. But true wealth isn't about money. It's about having the grace to help others even when they didn't help you." As the golden light faded from the sky, I reflected on our journey from desperation to strength, from abandonment to community, from resentment to a hard-won peace. We had lost a house but built a home. We had been denied help but found support in unexpected places. And most importantly, we had learned that true wealth lies not in what you have, but in what you're willing to give when it truly matters. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about helping someone who once refused to help you? What would you have done in my place? Sometimes life's greatest tests aren't about surviving hardship, but about how we respond when given the power to either heal or hurt others. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might be facing their own challenges with family relationships or difficult decisions. Remember, in the end, we're defined not by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. Wishing you strength, wisdom, and peace on your own journey.
I'm Mackenzie Wright, 32, and tonight was supposed to be a simple dinner at my parents' house. After barely speaking to my father for 3 years, I reluctantly agreed to attend his important business dinner as a favor to my mom. I arrived in my tailored blazer, portfolio tucked under my arm, professional as always. The moment I stepped into the foyer, my father's face contorted with panic. "Wait in the car," Dad hissed, shoving me away from his business dinner. We need these investors. If only he knew who I really was. Before I continue this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick around. You won't believe what happened when the CEO walked in and saw me sitting in my father's driveway. My childhood home in suburban Connecticut always felt more like my father's satellite office than a place where a family lived. Robert Wright built his tech company, Rightway Solutions, from nothing, a fact he reminded us of daily. The dining room table regularly disappeared beneath blueprints and financial spreadsheets rather than home-cooked meals. On the rare occasions we ate together, conversation inevitably centered around circuit boards and investor meetings. My mother, Grace, floated through our home like a pleasant ghost, rearranging flowers and making excuses for my father's absence at school events. "Your father's building something important," she'd say, smoothing my hair. "He's doing it all for us." I stopped believing that around age 12, when I realized he was doing it for himself. James, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child, a mirror image of our father with his analytical mind and singular focus. By 14, he was already programming small applications that made our father beam with pride. "That's my boy," he'd say, clapping James on the shoulder while I sat ignored at the same table. I wasn't without talent. Computers fascinated me just as much as they did James, but whenever I tried to join their technical conversations, my father would smile indulgently. "Why don't you help your mother with dinner, Kenzie? This stuff isn't really for you." When I was 16, I built my own computer from parts I'd saved up for, excitedly calling my father to see. He glanced at it for all of 10 seconds before handing me a pamphlet for fashion merchandising programs. "This is more your speed, honey. Technology is a tough business for women." That night, I made a decision. I would pursue technology on my own terms, without his approval or knowledge. I maintained the fiction that I was studying communications at college, while actually double majoring in computer science and business administration. I worked twice as hard as my classmates, knowing I couldn't come home for help if I struggled. The day of my graduation, when I walked across the stage to receive my actual diploma, my father's expression shifted from confusion to disappointment. "You lied to us for 4 years, he asked later at what should have been my celebration dinner. "I didn't lie," I replied calmly. "I just didn't correct your assumptions." "And now what?" "You'll struggle for years trying to break into a field where men have all the advantages, when you could have joined Rightway from the beginning." I'd already accepted a position at Blue Horizon Tech, one of his competitors. Not out of spite, but because their innovation excited me more than his outdated business model. When I told him, he laughed, actually laughed in my face. "They're hiring you as a diversity prop, Mackenzie. You'll be answering phones within 6 months when they realize you're out of your depth." My mother gasped. James stared at his plate. And something final broke between my father and me. "I guess we'll see," was all I said before walking out. For the next 3 years, I limited contact to brief calls with my mother and occasional texts with James. I poured everything into my career at Blue Horizon, starting in product development and quickly rising through the ranks as my innovations drove company growth. I worked 18-hour days, sacrificed relationships, and pushed myself beyond exhaustion. When promotion opportunities came, I seized them: project manager within a year, director of development the following year, and then vice president of innovation. Each step validated what I'd always known: I belonged in this industry. Meanwhile, through my mother's updates, I learned that Rightway Solutions was struggling. My father had failed to adapt to changing markets, stubbornly sticking to hardware when the industry had shifted to cloud-based solutions. James tried implementing changes, but my father resisted his own son's suggestions. Last week, my mother called sounding more anxious than usual. "Your father's arranged a dinner with potential investors," she said. "It's important, Kenzie. The company might not survive without this funding." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, reviewing quarterly projections on my second monitor while we spoke. "He's asking for you to be there." A family united front. Please, for me. I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed for details about these mysterious investors. But after just being appointed president of Blue Horizon, a promotion I hadn't shared with my family yet, I was drowning in work and agreed just to end the conversation. Fine. Text me the details. But I'm not pretending we're one big happy family. Thank you, sweetheart. It means more than you know. And that's how I found myself driving to my parents' house after 3 years of minimal contact, about to walk into a business dinner that would change everything. The humiliation burned hot across my face as I retreated down the front steps of my childhood home. My father's dismissive gesture, a hand waving me away like an annoying insect, felt like a slap. Through the bay window, I could see the dining room table set with my mother's best china, place settings for 6 arranged perfectly. My mother shot me an apologetic glance before disappearing into the kitchen. I stood in the driveway, car keys digging into my palm where I'd clenched my fist. Part of me, the part still seeking paternal approval after all these years, wanted to obey, to slide back into my Audi and wait like a chastised child. But the executive who'd closed million-dollar deals and led teams of brilliant engineers wanted to march back in and demand respect. Unbelievable, I muttered, unlocking my car and sliding into the driver's seat. I'd taken time away from my overwhelming first week as president to be here, and he couldn't even let me through the door. The leather seat cooled my anger somewhat as I pulled out my phone to check emails. If I was banished to the car, I might as well be productive. 43 new messages since I'd left the office 2 hours ago. I scrolled through them, responding to the most urgent. My assistant had organized the transition briefings for tomorrow. Legal needed my signature on the revised terms for the Singapore acquisition. Our director of engineering required approval for additional resources on Project Nexus. A notification banner slid down from the top of my screen, a message from Marcus Reynolds, Blue Horizon's CEO and now technically my direct report, though our relationship had always been more collaborative than hierarchical. Running 15 minutes late to right meeting. Traffic nightmare. Brief me before I arrive? Here the father is difficult but tech promising. I froze, reading the message twice. Marcus was heading to a meeting with someone named Wright who had a difficult father and promising technology. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the timing aligned perfectly with my father's investor dinner. I typed back quickly. Marcus, to confirm, you're meeting with Robert Wright of Rightway Solutions tonight? His response came seconds later. Yes. Small company, outdated model, but their new security protocol could solve our government contract issues. Didn't realize you knew them? My hands trembled slightly as I responded. Robert Wright is my father. I'm currently sitting in his driveway after being told to wait in the car during your meeting. He doesn't know I'm Blue Horizon's new president. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Marcus's reply. This is unexpected. Stay where you are. Arriving in 10. We'll handle this delicately. I set my phone down and stared through the windshield at the house where I grew up. The universe had orchestrated the perfect collision of my past and present. My father had been pursuing investment from my company, the very competitor he'd mocked me for joining. And now I, the daughter he dismissed as incapable of understanding technology, held decision-making power over his company's future. The irony was almost too perfect. I watched the street for Marcus's car while sorting through my conflicting emotions. Professional ethics demanded objectivity about Rightway's technology, regardless of personal history. But human nature made me savor the coming revelation. After years of condescension, my father would learn exactly what I'd accomplished without his support. A black Tesla I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway, and Amanda Miller, Blue Horizon's CFO, stepped out. I hadn't realized she would be attending. Amanda had been my mentor when I first joined the company, recognizing my potential long before anyone else. Seeing her tall figure striding confidently toward my parents' door cemented my decision. I wasn't going to hide in my car like an obedient daughter. I was going to walk back into that house as Mackenzie Wright, president of Blue Horizon Tech. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, reapplied my lipstick, and stepped out of the car. As I approached the front door for the second time that evening, I squared my shoulders and lifted my chin. This time, no one would be sending me away. I timed my entrance perfectly, slipping in behind the housekeeper who'd answered Amanda's knock. My father stood in the foyer, hand extended in greeting, his businessman smile firmly in place, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Ms. Miller, welcome to our home. We're honored you could." His words died as he registered my presence behind Amanda. The smile faltered, panic flashing across his features before he recovered. "Mackenzie, I thought I asked you to." Amanda turned, genuine surprise crossing her face. "Mackenzie? I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." Before I could respond, my father stepped between us, attempting damage control. My daughter was just leaving, unfortunately. Prior commitment. He shot me a warning glance. "Right, Kenzie?" I stepped forward, extending my hand to Amanda with deliberate professionalism. "Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I wouldn't miss this dinner for anything." Amanda's eyes darted between us, sensing the tension, but professionally maintaining her composure. My father's jaw tightened as he realized I wasn't going to be dismissed a second time. "Well, come in then," he said tightly, gesturing toward the dining room where my mother and brother were already seated with another man I didn't recognize, likely one of the private investors Amanda and Marcus had brought along. My mother's eyes widened seeing me enter. James looked confused, but nodded a greeting. The stranger rose politely as Amanda and I approached. "This is my daughter, Mackenzie," my father said dismissively. "She happened to be in town. And this is my son, James, who heads our development team." The way he emphasized son and development team while minimalizing my presence was so familiar it almost made me laugh. Something's never changed. Richard Blackwood, the stranger, introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Venture capital." We took our seats, my father visibly uncomfortable with my presence, but unable to object without creating an awkward scene. My mother nervously distributed the appetizers she'd prepared while my father launched into his practiced pitch about Rightway's illustrious 20-year history in the industry. "We've consistently delivered hardware solutions that prioritize security and reliability," he said, sliding glossy brochures across the table. "While others chase trends, we maintained our commitment to quality." James nodded along, occasionally adding technical specifications that seemed to interest Amanda and Richard. I remained silent, observing the dynamic and noting how my father presented the company's stagnation as steadfast principles rather than failure to innovate. "Our latest security protocol represents a breakthrough in government-grade encryption," my father continued. "James, explain the technical advantages to our guests." As James detailed the protocol's architecture, I recognized elements of a project I'd worked on during my final year of college, ideas I'd once tried to share with my father only to be ignored. Amanda caught my eye during James's explanation. "Mackenzie, what are your thoughts on this approach? Does it align with current industry standards?" The table fell silent. My father's expression tightened. "Mackenzie isn't involved in the technical aspects of our business." "Actually," I said, setting down my water glass, "the approach is sound but not revolutionary. Similar protocols have been implemented by at least 3 competitors in the last 18 months. The real value would be in how it's integrated with cloud architecture." James looked at me with newfound curiosity. "You've been keeping up with security protocols?" "You could say that," I replied, maintaining eye contact with my brother rather than looking at our father's darkening expression. Amanda seemed to be reassessing the entire situation. "Mackenzie, I didn't realize you were familiar with the Wright family beyond our brief mention of the meeting." "Very familiar," I said with a small smile. "I grew up in this house." The doorbell rang, saving my father from having to respond. His relief was palpable as he excused himself to greet who I knew must be Marcus. My mother used the interruption to escape to the kitchen while James leaned toward me. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Dad's been working on this deal for months." "Just being honest about the technology," I replied. "Isn't that what investors deserve?" Amanda overheard and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Richard was reviewing the brochures, seemingly oblivious to the family drama unfolding around him. Voices approached from the foyer. My father's overly enthusiastic tone carried down the hallway. "We're delighted you could join us, Mr. Reynolds. I understand you had some travel difficulties." "Nothing significant," came Marcus's familiar voice. "Sometimes Boston traffic has its own agenda." They entered the dining room, my father leading the way with Marcus following closely behind. At first, Marcus didn't notice me, his attention on greeting Amanda and Richard. Then his gaze swept around the table and landed on me. The momentary widening of his eyes was the only break in his professional demeanor. He recovered instantly, but what he did next changed the entire dynamic of the room. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Blue Horizon Tech, and one of the most respected figures in the industry, stopped short, straightened his posture, and inclined his head respectfully in my direction. "Madam President," he said, his tone deferential. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." A weighted silence blanketed the room. My father stood frozen beside Marcus, his expression cycling rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. My mother, returning from the kitchen with a serving dish, nearly dropped it as she registered Marcus's words. "I'm sorry," my father finally managed, his voice strained. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my daughter, Mackenzie." Marcus looked between us, genuine surprise replacing his initial shock. "Yes, Mackenzie Wright, the newly appointed president of Blue Horizon Technologies." He turned to me with an apologetic smile. "I didn't make the connection between Rightway Solutions and your family name, though perhaps I should have." All eyes shifted to me. Richard Blackwood set down his drink with deliberate care. Amanda's lips curved into a subtle, satisfied smile. James stared as though seeing me for the first time. "President?" my father repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. I maintained my composure, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The announcement went out internally last week. The press release is scheduled for Monday. My father sank slowly into his chair. The man who had dismissed me from his dinner hour ago now looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. "You're the president of Blue Horizon? Our competitor." "Yes," I said simply. The memory of my college graduation dinner flashed vividly in my mind. My father's dismissive laugh, his certainty that I'd be answering phones within 6 months. The contrast between that prediction and my current reality couldn't have been more stark. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, finally setting down the serving dish she'd been clutching. Would it have mattered? I kept my voice neutral, though the question was genuine. Dad made his opinions about my capabilities very clear years ago. James leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You've been at Blue Horizon this whole time?" "Working your way up. Starting in product development, then project management, director of innovation, vice president, and now president," I confirmed. "It's been a busy 3 years." Marcus cleared his throat, addressing the stunned table. "Mackenzie has been instrumental in Blue Horizon's growth. Our market valuation has tripled since she joined the company, largely due to innovations she spearheaded." My father's face had drained of color. I remembered his words the day I'd announced my job offer. "They're hiring you as a diversity prop, Mackenzie." How certain he'd been. How wrong. Richard Blackwood, who until now had been silently observing the family drama, finally spoke. "Well, this certainly changes the dynamics of our meeting." He turned to me with newfound interest. "I assume you're familiar with your father's proposal, then?" "Actually, I'm not," I replied honestly. "I was only invited to this dinner this afternoon, and I wasn't aware that Blue Horizon was the potential investor until Marcus texted me from his car." "Fascinating," Richard murmured, looking between my father and me with the keen assessment of someone who'd built a career evaluating not just business proposals, but the people behind them. My mother, ever the peacemaker, attempted to normalize the situation. Well, why don't we all sit down and enjoy dinner while we discuss business? I've prepared Robert's favorite, beef Wellington. Amanda exchanged glances with Marcus before addressing my father. Mr. Wright, given this unexpected development, perhaps we should reconsider the structure of tonight's discussion. My father seemed to shrink in his chair, the confident businessman persona crumbling. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction at the recognition I'd earned, but also an unexpected pang seeing him so diminished. Yes, of course, he said, his voice hollow. Whatever you think is best. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Investors who had arrived to evaluate my father's company were now deferring to me. The daughter who had been told to wait in the car was now effectively in control of the meeting. Marcus, ever the diplomat, smoothed over the awkward moment. I think we should proceed with dinner and our planned discussion. The technology itself deserves evaluation on its own merits, regardless of personal connections. He looked to me for confirmation. I nodded agreement. Absolutely. We're all professionals here. As my mother began serving dinner, the conversation tentatively resumed. But now, questions that had been directed to my father were instead posed to me. Richard wanted to know my assessment of market trends. Amanda asked about integration possibilities with our existing product line. Even James began addressing his technical explanations to me rather than our father. Throughout it all, my father remained uncharacteristically silent, watching me handle complex questions with the expertise he'd never believed I possessed. I caught him several times studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in his life. When dessert was served, my mother attempted to steer the conversation towards safer territory. Mackenzie, tell us about your new apartment. Are you still in Cambridge? Actually, I've moved to the Seaport District. The commute to our headquarters is easier. I took a small bite of the chocolate torte she'd prepared. This is delicious, Mom. She has a corner office overlooking the harbor, Marcus added, though she's rarely in it. Always in the development lab or meeting with clients. My father set down his fork. So you're actually involved in the technical work? Not just the business side. The question revealed how little he understood about my career. I hold 7 patents for Blue Horizon, Dad. I lead our innovation team while overseeing company operations. He nodded slowly, absorbing this information. The man who had once told me technology wasn't for women was now confronted with irrefutable evidence of my technical abilities. I had no idea, he said quietly. The simple admission was perhaps the closest thing to an apology I would get. As coffee was served, the conversation inevitably returned to the purpose of the meeting, Rightway's security protocol, and the potential investment from Blue Horizon. But now, I was clearly the decision-maker at the table. Let's discuss the details of your proposal, I said, meeting my father's eyes directly. I'd like to hear exactly what you're looking for from Blue Horizon. The dining room transformed into an impromptu boardroom as my father reluctantly began outlining Rightway's proposal. His usual confidence had abandoned him, replaced by a hesitancy I'd never witnessed before. He fumbled through the first few minutes, repeatedly checking my expression for reactions. We're seeking a strategic investment of $3 million to scale our security protocol, he explained, sliding a folder toward me rather than Marcus. With proper funding, we believe we can capture 15% of the government security market within 18 months. I opened the folder and scanned the projections, immediately identifying several overly optimistic assumptions. These market penetration estimates seem aggressive given the established competition, I noted. What's your strategy for differentiating from CyberShield's similar protocol that launched last quarter? My father faltered. CyberShield has a comparable product? James jumped in, clearly better informed about the competitive landscape. Their approach uses a different encryption method, but you're right about the overlap. We believe our implementation is more efficient and offers better protection against quantum computing threats. I nodded, impressed by my brother's assessment. That's a valid advantage, though the quantum threat timeline is still theoretical. Walk me through your architecture. James stood and sketched a diagram on the notepad he'd brought, explaining the technical underpinnings with clear expertise. I asked pointed questions about scalability, integration capabilities, and resource requirements, areas I knew would concern our government clients. The core encryption engine is solid, I acknowledged after his explanation. But your deployment model is outdated. Government agencies are migrating to cloud infrastructure, which this doesn't adequately address. My father frowned. Our clients value physical security. Cloud solutions introduce vulnerabilities. That was true 5 years ago, I countered. But zero-trust architecture has largely mitigated those concerns. The Pentagon itself has moved 80% of non-classified operations to secure cloud environments. Amanda nodded in agreement. The market is definitely heading that direction. My father looked to James for support, but my brother reluctantly sided with me. She's right, Dad. I've tried to discuss cloud integration before, but you were convinced clients wouldn't accept it. The tension in my father's jaw revealed his discomfort at being contradicted by both his children in front of potential investors. I could have pressed the advantage, highlighting all the ways Rightway had failed to evolve under his leadership. But that would have been personal, not professional. Instead, I redirected. The core technology has value, particularly the encryption method James described. With modifications, it could complement our existing government solutions portfolio. Marcus, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics while taking notes, finally spoke. What would those modifications entail, in your assessment? A complete restructuring of the deployment architecture, integration with our cloud security framework, and updated threat modeling, I replied. Essentially preserving the encryption engine while rebuilding everything around it. My father's expression darkened. So you'd strip away everything except the one component my son developed. The comment revealed more than he probably intended, an acknowledgement that James, not him, had created the valuable element of their technology. I'm evaluating this, as I would any potential acquisition, I explained evenly. Identifying which components add value to our existing ecosystem and which don't. Richard Blackwood, who had been silently assessing the discussion, leaned forward. If I may offer an observation? This seems less like an investment opportunity and more like an acquisition target. The protocol itself has merit, but the business infrastructure appears insufficient to compete independently. My father's face flushed. Rightway has been independent for 20 years. We're not looking to be absorbed by a larger company. Dad, James interjected gently. We need to be realistic. We've lost market share every quarter for the past 3 years. The protocol is promising, but we don't have the resources to scale it properly. It was the first I'd heard about just how dire their situation had become. My mother's worried glance at my father confirmed James's assessment. What exactly is your current runway? I asked, shifting into full business evaluation mode. My father hesitated before admitting, for months at current burn rate. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. No wonder my mother had been so insistent about this dinner. They weren't just seeking growth capital, they were fighting for survival. I see 3 potential paths forward, I said after a moment's consideration. First, a limited investment focused specifically on commercializing the encryption protocol as a standalone product. Second, an acquisition of the intellectual property and key technical staff. Or third, a structured wind-down where we license the technology and provide transition opportunities for your team members. My clinical assessment seemed to hit my father physically. The man who had built the company from nothing was now hearing options for its end. Is there no scenario where Rightway continues as is? He asked quietly. I met his gaze directly. Based on what I've heard tonight? No. The market has evolved beyond your current business model. The valuable technology could survive, but the company structure as it exists today isn't viable long-term. A heavy silence followed my assessment. Marcus and Amanda exchanged glances, clearly impressed by my objectivity despite the personal connection. Richard Blackwood studied my father with the detached interest of someone watching a case study unfold. James surprised me by speaking up. I think we need to consider the acquisition options seriously, Dad. It would preserve what we've built while providing the resources to actually implement it properly. My father's hands clenched on the table. For a moment, I thought he might erupt in anger, the Robert Wright I remembered would have. Instead, he asked in a controlled voice, and what would happen to our team? People who've been loyal to us for years. The question revealed a concern I hadn't expected, not for himself, but for his employees. Perhaps I'd misjudged some aspects of his character. In an acquisition scenario, we'd evaluate each position against our current structure, I explained. Technical roles, particularly those involved with the protocol development, would likely transition. Some redundant positions would receive competitive severance packages. And me, he asked, the question hanging heavily in the air. The room went silent. Everyone recognized the significance of the moment, a father asking his daughter about his professional fate. That would depend on what role you want, Dad, I answered honestly. If you're looking to stay involved, we could discuss a transitional advisory position. If you're ready to step back, we'd ensure a respectful exit with appropriate recognition for the company you built. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. After a long moment, he looked around the table at the investors, then at James, and finally back to me. I need to make a call, he said, rising from his chair. Please excuse me for a moment. As he left the room, I found myself at a crossroads. Stay and continue the professional discussion, or follow and have the personal conversation that had been brewing for years. Take 10 minutes, Marcus suggested quietly, reading my hesitation. We'll discuss the technical aspects with James. I stood and followed my father out of the dining room. I found my father standing on the back porch, staring out at the garden my mother had meticulously maintained for decades. The motion-activated lights illuminated his profile, and for the first time, I noticed how much he had aged since I'd seen him last. His shoulders, once perpetually squared with confidence, now curved slightly inward. He heard my approach, but didn't turn immediately. I always thought James would eventually take over right way, he said to the night air. Never imagined I'd be negotiating its end with my daughter. It doesn't have to be the end, I replied, stopping beside him at the railing. The technology can continue, evolve. That's how innovation works. He finally turned to face me. Like you evolved beyond what I thought possible? The question hung between us, complex and loaded with years of misunderstanding. I should have been in the car when your CEO arrived, he continued before I could respond. That was inappropriate of me. Coming from my father, this awkward acknowledgement was the equivalent of a profound apology. I accepted it with a small nod. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. About your promotions, your success. Your mother would have been so proud. Would you have been proud? I countered quietly. Or would you have found a way to diminish it like you always did? He flinched slightly. Was I really that bad? Do you remember my 17th birthday? I asked instead of answering directly. He frowned, clearly searching his memory. I showed you the algorithm I'd developed for predictive text. This was before it was common on phones. I'd spent months working on it, taught myself 2 programming languages to build it. His expression remained blank. You glanced at it for maybe 30 seconds, said that's nice, honey, and then spent the rest of the evening helping James debug his college project. The memory still stung, even after all these years. That was the pattern. My achievements were nice. James's were revolutionary. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by genuine regret. I didn't see it then. How I treated you differently. You told me technology wasn't for women, Dad. You actively discouraged me from the path I was clearly meant to follow. He ran a hand over his face. I was wrong. Obviously, spectacularly wrong. He gestured vaguely toward the dining room where Marcus and the others waited. The president of Blue Horizon, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. My daughter. The pride that had been absent all my life was suddenly evident in his voice, and to my surprise, it still mattered. The little girl who had yearned for her father's approval felt a warmth she'd long ago stopped expecting. "I didn't set out to prove you wrong," I said softly. "I just couldn't be anyone but myself." "I wish I'd known who you really were," he replied. "I was so caught up in my own vision of what you should be that I never saw what you could be." The back door opened, spilling light onto the porch as my mother stepped out. She'd removed her hostess apron and looked between us with cautious hope. "Everything okay out here?" she asked. "We're talking, Mom," I assured her. Really talking, maybe for the first time. She moved to my father's side, her hand finding his automatically. "Your father called me last week after he found out Blue Horizon might be interested in the company. He was so excited about potentially working with you, even though he didn't know you were in leadership there. He said it might be a chance to repair things between you two." I looked at my father in surprise. "Is that true?" He nodded, somewhat embarrassed. "I may have tracked your career more than you realized. Not the president part, that shocked me completely, but I knew you were doing well there. I thought maybe if our companies had a relationship, we might have a reason to reconnect." The revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of the past 3 years. While I'd been assuming he'd written me off completely, he'd apparently been following my progress from a distance. "I should have been bigger than my pride," he admitted. "Should have reached out directly instead of creating this business pretense." The back door opened again, and James stepped out, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Everyone's wondering if we're still having a meeting or if this has become exclusively a family therapy session," he said, attempting humor, but clearly uncomfortable. "We're coming back in," my father assured him. Then, to my surprise, he asked, "What do you think about the acquisition option, James?" Honestly, my brother seemed startled by the direct question. "I think Mackenzie's right," he said after a moment's consideration. "Our technology deserves a chance to reach its potential, and Blue Horizon has the infrastructure to make that happen. The company name matters less than what we've built." My father nodded slowly, accepting his son's assessment with unexpected grace. "And what about you? Would you want to join Blue Horizon if this goes forward?" James glanced at me uncertainly. "Would there be a place for me?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "Your encryption work is brilliant, James. Any company would be lucky to have you on their team, including ours." My brother smiled, perhaps the first genuine smile we'd shared in years. "That would be interesting. Working together after all this time." My father straightened his shoulders, some of his businessman composure returning. "Well, shall we go back in and discuss the details like professionals?" I find myself suddenly open to options I wouldn't have considered an hour ago. As we turned toward the door, he paused, looking directly at me. "Mackenzie, I was wrong about you. About so many things. I'm sorry it took this dramatic turn of events for me to see it." Coming from Robert Wright, this explicit acknowledgement of error was unprecedented. I recognized it for the significant step it represented. "Better late than never, Dad," I replied, surprised by the emotion tightening my throat. "Let's go see what we can build together, finally." 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, a bottle of champagne in hand and a genuine smile on my face. The quarterly family dinner had become our new tradition, one I actually looked forward to rather than dreaded. "There she is," my mother called, emerging from the kitchen wearing an apron emblazoned with "World's Best Mom" that I'd given her for her birthday. Right on time. My father appeared from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose and a tablet in hand. He'd aged backwards somehow in the past months, standing taller and moving with renewed energy. "Mackenzie, I was just reviewing the integration numbers. Remarkable progress. The acquisition had gone through smoothly. Rightway Solutions officially became Blue Horizon's government security division, with James leading the technical team and my father serving as a strategic advisor during the transition." The encryption protocol, integrated with our cloud architecture, had already secured 2 major government contracts. The Pentagon meeting went well, my mother asked, taking the champagne and ushering me toward the living room. Better than expected. They've committed to implementing the security protocol across all non-classified systems by next quarter. I slipped off my jacket and relaxed into the familiar sofa. James was brilliant in the technical demonstration. Your brother has always been good with the details, my father acknowledged, setting his tablet aside. But he needed your vision to see the bigger possibilities. You complement each other well. Such praise would have been unimaginable 4 months ago. The father who once dismissed my technological aptitude now regularly sought my input on strategic decisions and proudly told anyone who would listen about his daughter's accomplishments. The doorbell rang, announcing James's arrival with his girlfriend, Emma, whom he'd met during the company integration process. They entered laughing, carrying dessert from the bakery near Blue Horizon's offices. Sorry we're late, James apologized. The team meeting ran long. We've solved the latency issue in the protocol. That's wonderful news, my father said, clapping him on the shoulder before turning to include me. Both my children, revolutionizing cybersecurity. Who would have thought? Some of us saw the potential earlier than others. My mother teased him gently, the comment free of bitterness. My father took it with good humor. The greatest mistake of my career was underestimating my daughter, he admitted openly. Thank goodness she didn't listen to me. As we gathered around the dining table, the same one where our confrontation had unfolded months earlier, I marveled at the transformation in our family dynamics. My father, once the unquestioned authority on all matters, now regularly deferred to my professional judgment. My mother had found her voice, no longer tiptoeing around his ego. James and I had developed the sibling relationship we should have had all along, built on mutual respect and collaboration. I invited Marcus and Amanda for next month's dinner, my father mentioned as we passed dishes around. They've been instrumental in making this transition work. Amanda told me she knew you'd be running the company someday, my mother said. She saw it from your first week apparently. I smiled, remembering how Amanda had taken me under her wing when everyone else had underestimated me. She believed in me before I fully believed in myself. That's what we should have done, my father said quietly. Believed in who you actually were instead of who we thought you should be. It wasn't all bad, Dad, I offered graciously. Your expectations taught me perseverance. If you'd made everything easy, maybe I wouldn't have developed the resilience I needed. He considered this, then shook his head. That's generous of you, but let's not rewrite history. I was wrong, plain and simple. The best thing I can do now is acknowledge it and learn from it. His humility, so at odds with the father I'd grown up with, still surprised me. The business setbacks had broken something fundamental in his self-image, creating space for growth neither of us had anticipated. Over dessert, James raised his glass. To family's second chances, he proposed. And to Mackenzie, who had every right to reject us but chose reconciliation instead. To honesty, I countered, raising my own glass. Without that dinner confrontation, we might still be maintaining polite fictions instead of building something real. My father nodded thoughtfully. The greatest lesson I've learned through all this is that success isn't measured by controlling everything and everyone around you. It's about recognizing potential in its many forms and having the wisdom to nurture it rather than reshape it. Speaking of recognizing potential, my mother interjected, your cousin Stephanie called today. Her daughter is interested in computer science, but feeling discouraged by her male classmates. I thought perhaps you might talk with her, Mackenzie. Of course, I agreed immediately, remembering my own journey. I'd be happy to mentor her. And Right Horizon could offer her an internship next summer, James suggested, using the nickname employees had given our division. Start building the pipeline early. My father beamed with pride, genuine pride that encompassed both his children equally. Who knows? Maybe she'll be running the company after Mackenzie. The comment, delivered without a trace of his former sexism, marked how far he'd come. The man who once told me technology wasn't for women was now actively encouraging the next generation of female engineers. As dinner concluded and we moved to the living room for coffee, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The hurt child who'd left this house determined to prove her father wrong had become a woman secure enough to allow reconciliation without sacrificing her achievements or identity. "I've been thinking," my father said, settling into his favorite armchair, "about starting a foundation focused on girls in STEM, using some of the acquisition proceeds to fund scholarships and mentorship programs." "That's a wonderful idea," I encouraged him. "Blue Horizon would match the funding. We've been looking to expand our community initiatives. I'd like to name it after you," he added. "The Mackenzie Wright Foundation for Innovation, if you're comfortable with that." The gesture, unexpected and meaningful, brought tears to my eyes. "I'd be honored, Dad." He nodded, emotion evident in his own expression. "It's time I put my resources behind my evolved beliefs. Actions matter more than words." As the evening wound down and we prepared to depart, my father pulled me aside for a private moment. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that even though I came to this realization far too late, I couldn't be prouder of the woman and leader you've become. And that's not because you proved me wrong or achieved professional success. It's because you had the courage to be authentically yourself despite everything I did to discourage it." I hugged him then, perhaps the first genuine embrace we'd shared in decades. "Thank you for being willing to change, Dad. Many people couldn't have admitted they were wrong so completely. When the evidence is as overwhelming as a CEO bowing to your daughter," he chuckled, "only a fool would keep denying reality." Driving home that night, I reflected on the lessons of the past months. Sometimes the most profound growth comes through painful confrontations we'd rather avoid. Sometimes long-established patterns can change if we're brave enough to challenge them directly. And sometimes, the validation we spend years chasing matters less than the self-belief we develop along the way. The young woman who'd been told to wait in the car had become the executive whose vision was reshaping an industry. But more importantly, she'd become someone who understood that true success isn't measured by titles or achievements, but by the courage to remain authentic in a world that often rewards conformity. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making others pay for underestimating you. It's succeeding so tremendously that they have no choice but to recognize what they refused to see all along. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated by someone whose opinion mattered to you? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of redemption and professional triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of perseverance and success. Remember, the people who underestimate you don't determine your worth. Your courage to remain true to yourself does. Thank you for listening, and until next time, believe in your own potential even when others don't. I'm Hazel, 32, and that Sunday at my in-laws' house changed everything. I walked in as my 7-year-old daughter Emma sat on the floor, holding her arm, tears streaming down her face. My heart stopped. "He's a boy," my mother-in-law Margaret said dismissively. She must have said something to provoke him. They actually made my little girl apologize to her cousin Jacob, who had just hit her. I smiled, though fury burned inside me. I picked Emma up, and we walked out without a word. 2 days later, they got a wake-up call they never expected. Before I continue the story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for your child. To understand why that moment was the breaking point, you need to know about our family dynamics. I met my husband Robert 9 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. It was one of those movie-worthy moments. He spilled his drink on my dress, apologized profusely, and then spent the entire evening making me laugh. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a beautiful summer ceremony. Robert is kind, hardworking, and a wonderful father to Emma, but he has one significant blind spot: his parents. Margaret and William have always been overly involved in our lives. They're the type of in-laws who never quite accepted that their son had formed his own family unit. At first, I tried to embrace their involvement. I thought having attentive grandparents would be beneficial for our future children. I couldn't have been more wrong. Robert has one brother, Thomas, who's 3 years older and married to Beth. They have an 8-year-old son, Jacob. From the beginning, it was clear that Thomas was the golden child in the family. His achievements were celebrated extravagantly while Robert's were merely acknowledged. This dynamic extended to the next generation. Jacob became the golden grandchild, while our Emma was treated as an afterthought. Jacob has always been a challenging child. He's loud, demanding, and prone to tantrums when he doesn't get his way. My in-laws have never seen this as problematic. He's just spirited, Margaret would say. He knows what he wants. Meanwhile, if Emma so much as spoke above a whisper, she was being difficult or showing off. The first time I noticed a real problem was at Emma's 4th birthday party. Jacob, then 5, wanted to open Emma's presents. When told he couldn't, he pushed Emma into her cake. Instead of disciplining Jacob, my in-laws laughed and called it just kids being kids. Robert brushed it off too, saying, "They're cousins, they'll have their moments." The incidents continued. Jacob would take toys from Emma, and when she protested, she was told to share with your cousin. If Emma took something of Jacob's, however, there was immediate intervention. "That's not yours, Emma," Margaret would scold. "Jacob doesn't have to share if he doesn't want to." I brought these concerns to Robert numerous times. "Your parents are treating Emma unfairly," I'd say. His response was always some version of, "That's just how they are," or "You're being too sensitive." It created a growing tension in our marriage, with Robert caught between supporting his wife and pleasing his parents. Emma, sweet and sensitive by nature, began to dread family gatherings. She'd cling to me and ask if we could stay home. When I asked why, she'd just say, "I don't think Grandma and Grandpa like me very much." It broke my heart, but Robert insisted she was misinterpreting things. Last Christmas, the situation escalated when Jacob received a mountain of gifts, while Emma got only 2 small presents. When I mentioned the disparity, William said, "Well, boys are more expensive to shop for." I watched Emma's face fall as she tried to hide her disappointment. That night, I told Robert we needed to limit our visits, but he accused me of trying to separate him from his family. Our parenting styles differed dramatically from Thomas and Beth's approach with Jacob. We believed in setting boundaries and teaching Emma about consequences, while they seemed to let Jacob do whatever he wanted. Beth occasionally showed signs of concern about Jacob's behavior, but Thomas was quick to shut down any suggestion that their son needed guidance. Despite the tensions, we maintained regular family dinners at Margaret and William's house. Robert insisted these gatherings were important for Emma to build relationships with her extended family. I reluctantly agreed, though I made sure to stay close to Emma during these visits. The week before the incident, Jacob had pushed Emma while they were playing in the backyard. When I brought it up, Margaret said, "Emma needs to toughen up. The real world isn't going to coddle her." I noticed Robert wincing at his mother's words, but as usual, he said nothing. By the time Sunday's dinner came around, my patience with the situation was wearing thin. Little did I know this would be the day everything changed. The Sunday started like any other family gathering at my in-laws' house. Robert and I arrived with Emma around 4 in the afternoon, bringing a homemade apple pie that Margaret would inevitably criticize for not being quite right. The house smelled of pot roast and potatoes. William prided himself on his cooking, one of the few genuinely pleasant aspects of these visits. Thomas, Beth, and Jacob arrived shortly after us. Jacob immediately ran to the playroom where the adults had set up toys for the children, barely acknowledging anyone's presence. Emma hesitated before following him, looking at me with those uncertain eyes that always made my heart ache. "Go ahead, sweetie," I encouraged her. "I'll be right in the living room if you need me." The adults settled in the living room with drinks, wine for the women, beer for the men. Margaret launched into her usual interrogation about our lives, focusing particularly on Robert's work and whether he was finally going to get that promotion Thomas had received years ago at a different company. I sat quietly, nodding at appropriate intervals while keeping an ear tuned toward the playroom. About 30 minutes into our visit, Robert's phone rang. It was his boss. Unusual for a Sunday, but there was an issue with a client in a different time zone that couldn't wait. He stepped onto the back porch to take the call, leaving me alone with his family. "Emma seems so quiet lately," Margaret commented as Robert left. "Is she making any friends at school?" "Jacob has so many friends, the phone never stops ringing." The comparison was typical, subtle enough that calling it out would make me seem oversensitive. Thomas chimed in. "Jacob's teacher says he's a natural leader. All the kids follow what he does." Beth nodded proudly, though I'd noticed before that she sometimes seemed uncomfortable with these conversations. William was about to add something when I heard a thud from the playroom, followed by Emma's cry. I was on my feet instantly, but William waved dismissively. "Let them sort it out. Kids need to learn to resolve their own conflicts." Something in me refused to sit back down. "I'll just check," I said, already moving toward the playroom. What I saw when I entered stopped me in my tracks. Emma was sitting on the floor, holding her arm, tears streaming down her face. Jacob stood over her, clutching a colorful toy robot that I recognized as the one I'd bought for Emma's birthday the previous month. She had brought it along today because it was her current favorite. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to Emma's side. Before Emma could answer, Margaret appeared behind me. "What's all this fuss about?" she asked. Emma looked up, her voice trembling. "Jacob wanted my robot, and I said we could take turns, but he grabbed it and pushed me. Jacob immediately countered. She wouldn't share. And she called me stupid." I examined Emma's arm, seeing the red mark forming near her elbow. "Did you push her, Jacob?" I asked directly. "She wouldn't give me the toy," he insisted, as if this justified his actions. Margaret stepped forward. "Now, Emma, you know you're supposed to share with your cousin." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was pushed to the ground. "Margaret, she's hurt." William joined us, surveying the scene with a frown. "What's going on?" "Jacob pushed Emma and took her toy," I explained. William sighed as if I was making a mountain out of a molehill. "He's a boy, Hazel. Boys play rough sometimes." Emma must have said something to provoke him. I stared at him, incredulous. "So it's Emma's fault she was pushed?" Margaret put her hand on Jacob's shoulder protectively. "Jacob, did Emma say something mean to you?" Jacob, quickly picking up on the direction of the conversation, nodded vigorously. "She said I couldn't play with the robot because it's hers and I'd break it." "See?" Margaret said, as if this explained everything. "Emma needs to learn to be more generous." I looked at my daughter, who was still holding her arm, confusion and hurt written across her face. Emma doesn't have to share everything, especially not with someone who hurts her. "Oh, for heaven's sake," William interjected. "This is how children learn. Jacob is just being a normal boy. Emma needs to toughen up a bit." Margaret nodded in agreement. "Emma, I think you owe Jacob an apology for not sharing and for saying mean things." I was about to protest when Emma, ever the peacemaker, quietly said, "I'm sorry, Jacob." Jacob smirked, clutching the robot tighter. The look of victory on his face made my blood boil. "They're all better," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Now you two play nicely." I looked at my daughter, sitting there having been forced to apologize to the very person who hurt her. Something inside me snapped. Years of watching Emma being diminished, of having her feelings invalidated, of being expected to accept mistreatment, it all culminated in this moment. I smiled, though fury burned inside me. Without a word, I picked Emma up, grabbed her small backpack, and walked toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Margaret called after me. "Dinner's almost ready." I didn't respond. I didn't look back. I strapped Emma into her car seat, got behind the wheel, and drove away, leaving stunned silence behind us. Robert called about 10 minutes later, confused and concerned. What happened? Why did you leave? Call me when you're ready to come home, I replied calmly. We need to talk. The drive home was quiet at first. In the rearview mirror, I could see Emma looking out the window, her small face troubled. I waited until we were about halfway home before speaking. Emma, sweetie, I want you to know something very important, I said, making sure my voice was steady despite the anger still simmering inside me. What happened back there wasn't right. You don't ever have to let anyone hurt you, and you certainly don't have to apologize when someone else does something wrong. Emma's eyes met mine in the mirror. But Grandma said I had to say sorry. Grandma was wrong, I said firmly. Even adults can be wrong sometimes. No one has the right to hurt you, not even your cousin. She was quiet for a moment. Jacob does that a lot, she finally admitted. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean, a lot? He pushes me or grabs things from me when the grown-ups aren't looking. Last time, he pinched me really hard and said if I told anyone, no one would believe me because everyone likes him better. My heart shattered. All this time, my daughter had been enduring mistreatment in silence. Emma, why didn't you tell me this before? Her answer was devastating in its simplicity. Daddy always says I should try harder to get along with Jacob. And Grandma and Grandpa always take his side. We arrived home, and I helped Emma get settled with a snack and her favorite cartoon while I processed what I'd learned. This wasn't just about one incident. It was a pattern of behavior that everyone had enabled, including, to my shame, myself. By continuing to expose Emma to these situations, I had failed to protect her. Robert came home about an hour later, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. What happened? He demanded as soon as he walked through the door. My parents said you just grabbed Emma and left without explanation. I asked him to join me in the kitchen, away from Emma's ears. Jacob pushed Emma to the ground and took her toy. When she tried to explain, your parents accused her of provoking him and forced her to apologize to Jacob. Robert ran a hand through his hair. I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Kids get into scuffles all the time. Emma just told me that Jacob regularly hurts her when adults aren't looking. He's been bullying her. Robert and your parents have been enabling it. Kids will be kids, he started, but I cut him off. No. That's exactly the attitude that's allowing this to continue. Would you say kids will be kids if it was some stranger's child hurting Emma? Or is it only acceptable because it's your nephew? Robert looked taken aback. Of course, I don't want Emma to be hurt, but you know how my parents are. They've always favored Thomas and Jacob. And that makes it okay? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Your daughter is being hurt physically and emotionally, and you're worried about rocking the boat with your parents? What do you want me to do, Hazel? Cut them off? They're my family. We're your family, I countered. Emma and I are your family. And right now, your daughter needs you to stand up for her. Our argument continued for nearly an hour, with Robert alternating between defensiveness and grudging acknowledgement that something needed to change. By the end, he agreed that Jacob's behavior was problematic, but he was still resistant to confronting his parents directly. As if on cue, Robert's phone rang. It was Margaret. He put it on speaker. Robert, your wife's behavior today was completely unacceptable, she began without preamble. To walk out before dinner without even saying goodbye. We expect an apology. Robert looked at me, conflicted. I shook my head firmly. Mom, he said hesitantly. Jacob pushed Emma and took her toy. Hazel was upset that you made Emma apologize. Oh, for heaven's sake, Margaret huffed. Jacob is just being a normal boy. Emma needs to learn to share and not be so sensitive. You need to talk to your wife about her overreaction. After the call ended, I looked at Robert. Do you see now? They don't even acknowledge that what Jacob did was wrong. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open. Sleep wasn't coming, so I might as well be productive. I began researching child development and bullying behaviors, reading articles from child psychologists about the importance of teaching children to respect boundaries. I found resources about how enabling bad behavior in children can lead to more serious problems as they grow older. I called Emma's pediatrician first thing Monday morning and scheduled an appointment. Dr. Larson examined Emma's arm, noting the bruise that had formed, and asked her gentle questions about what happened. When Emma mentioned that Jacob had hurt her before, Dr. Larson gave me a concerned look. "Emma, would you like to look at some books in the waiting room for a few minutes while I talk to your mom?" she asked. Once Emma was out of earshot, Dr. Larson turned to me. "Hazel, repeated aggressive behavior like this needs to be addressed. It's not just boys being boys. It's a pattern that can cause lasting harm to both children. Jacob is learning that his actions have no consequences, while Emma is learning that her boundaries don't matter." I nodded, tears threatening. "I know. I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. Document everything," she advised. "And be clear about your boundaries. Emma needs to see that you'll protect her, even if it means making difficult decisions about family relationships." That evening, while Robert played with Emma, I sat down and started documenting every incident I could remember involving Jacob and our in-laws' dismissive responses. The list was longer than I expected, dating back to when Emma was just a toddler. I also drafted an email that I knew would change our family dynamics forever. "What are you doing?" Robert asked when he came to bed and found me still typing. "I'm taking a stand," I replied, showing him the list I'd compiled. "This has been going on for years, Robert. It stops now." He read through the incidents, his face growing increasingly troubled. I had no idea it was this bad, because every single time it was dismissed as normal or as Emma's fault. But look at the pattern. This isn't healthy for anyone. Not for Emma, and not even for Jacob. He's learning that he can hurt others without consequences. Robert was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" I showed him the draft email addressed to his parents, Thomas and Beth. It laid out the pattern of behavior, included educational resources about child development and bullying, and set clear boundaries for future interactions. The conditions were non-negotiable: acknowledgement of the problem, a sincere apology to Emma, and a commitment to addressing Jacob's behavior. "If they can't agree to these terms," I said quietly, "then we need to limit Emma's exposure to them. I won't keep subjecting her to an environment where she's being hurt." Robert read the email twice. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the little boy who wanted his parents' approval battling with the father who needed to protect his daughter. "Send it," he finally said. "You're right. This has gone on too long." I hit send at 1:37 a.m., knowing that the next day would bring either the beginning of healing or the deepening of divisions. Either way, things would never be the same. The email I sent to my in-laws, Thomas and Beth, was the result of hours of careful thought and research. I wanted it to be educational rather than accusatory, though I didn't shy away from the hard truths. The subject line read, "Concerning Sunday's incident and moving forward." I began by detailing what happened on Sunday, being careful to stick to the facts without emotional language. Then I listed the previous incidents Emma had experienced, dating back to when she was 3 years old. Reading it all laid out chronologically made the pattern undeniable. "Emma has shared with me that Jacob regularly hurts her when adults aren't present," I wrote. "She's been afraid to speak up because she's been conditioned to believe that her feelings don't matter and that no one will believe her. This is deeply concerning, not just for Emma's well-being, but for Jacob's development as well." I included links to articles from child psychologists about the importance of teaching children about consent and respecting physical boundaries. I attached a PDF about the long-term effects of childhood bullying, both on the victims and on the children who are allowed to bully others without intervention. Children who are permitted to hurt others without consequences often struggle with relationships and boundaries as they grow older, I explained. By dismissing Jacob's behavior as normal or acceptable, we're doing him a disservice. He needs guidance to develop empathy and self-control. I also attached a photo of Emma's arm, showing the bruise that had formed where Jacob had pushed her. Seeing the physical evidence made the situation impossible to minimize. Moving forward, I continued, we need to establish some guidelines for family interactions. These are non-negotiable if we want to maintain a healthy relationship between our families. 1. Acknowledgement that pushing, hitting, or otherwise physically hurting others is never acceptable, regardless of gender. 2. A sincere apology to Emma from both Jacob and the adults who dismissed her experience. 3. A commitment to addressing problematic behavior immediately when it occurs, without placing blame on the victim. 4. Agreement to attend at least one family therapy session to discuss healthy boundaries and conflict resolution. 5. Understanding that Emma will not be forced to share her belongings or to spend time alone with Jacob until trust has been rebuilt. I concluded by expressing hope that we could work together to create a healthier dynamic for all the children in the family. We love you all and want Emma to have a close relationship with her grandparents and cousin. But that relationship must be built on mutual respect and safety. I included a note from Dr. Larson about the psychological impact of forcing children to accept mistreatment. When we tell children to apologize for being hurt, we teach them that their boundaries don't matter and that speaking up against mistreatment is wrong. This can have lasting effects on their self-esteem and future relationships. Before sending the email, I showed it to Robert one more time. He read it carefully, his expression serious. "This is going to upset them," he said finally. "I know. But is there anything in here that isn't true or necessary?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It's all factual. And it needs to be said." He looked me in the eyes. "Send it. I'm with you on this." Hitting that send button felt like setting off an explosion with a delayed fuse. I knew it wouldn't be long before the fallout began. The response was swift and exactly as I'd expected. My phone started ringing at 7:22 a.m. It was Margaret. I let it go to voicemail, needing to get Emma ready for school before dealing with the situation. When I checked the message later, Margaret's voice was tight with anger. "I don't appreciate being lectured about how to handle children, Hazel. We raised 2 successful sons without all these modern parenting theories. Call me back immediately so we can discuss your ridiculous demands." William called Robert at work, trying to bypass me entirely. "Your wife is overreacting," he told Robert. "Jacob is just a normal, active boy. Emma needs to learn to stand up for herself instead of having her mother fight her battles." I was proud when Robert stood his ground. "Dad, Jacob hurt Emma. That's not acceptable, no matter how you try to justify it." The most surprising response came from Beth. She texted me directly. "Can we meet for coffee? Just the 2 of us. There's more to this situation than you know." Throughout the day, the calls and texts continued. Margaret tried various approaches: anger, guilt, appeals to family loyalty. "After all we've done for you and Emma," one message read, "this is how you repay us? By attacking our parenting and threatening to keep Emma away." I maintained radio silence, giving them time to process the email fully. That evening, Robert and I sat down with Emma and had an age-appropriate conversation about boundaries. "Your body belongs to you," I told her. "No one has the right to hurt you, and you don't have to share your things if you don't want to." "Even with Jacob?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Especially with Jacob," Robert affirmed, and I felt a surge of love for my husband. "And if anyone ever hurts you or makes you feel bad, you can always tell us. We will always believe you and protect you." The relief on Emma's face broke my heart. How long had she been carrying this burden, thinking she had to accept mistreatment to please her family? The next morning, I met Beth at a quiet cafe away from both our homes. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "I want you to know that I agree with everything in your email," she said without preamble. "Jacob's behavior has been concerning me for some time, but Thomas and his parents always shut me down when I try to address it." She revealed that Jacob had been having problems at school too. His teacher had called multiple times about aggressive behavior toward classmates. Thomas's parents always say it's the other kid's fault, or the teacher is targeting Jacob unfairly. Thomas believes them because it's easier than facing the truth. Which is? I prompted. That Jacob needs help, she said simply. He's struggling with impulse control and empathy, and instead of getting him the support he needs, everyone's pretending there's no problem. She looked down at her coffee. I've tried to talk to his pediatrician, but Thomas always takes over the appointments and dismisses my concerns. This conversation gave me hope that at least one other adult in the family recognized the seriousness of the situation. Before we parted, Beth agreed to support our conditions and to work on getting Thomas on board as well. Later that day, Thomas called Robert, furious about the email. Your wife is trying to turn Beth against me, he accused. Jacob is a normal kid. Stop letting Hazel make mountains out of molehills. Robert held firm. This isn't about taking sides, Thomas. It's about making sure both kids are safe and learning healthy ways to interact. The standoff continued through the evening, with Margaret and William rallying Thomas to their side while Beth cautiously aligned with us. The family was fracturing along lines that had always existed beneath the surface, but had never been so explicitly exposed. That night, Robert and I were more united than we had been in years. I should have stood up to them sooner, he admitted as we got ready for bed. I always knew they favored Thomas and Jacob, but I told myself it wasn't that bad or that you were being too sensitive. What changed? I asked. Seeing that bruise on Emma's arm, he said quietly, and realizing that she's been hurting for years while I looked the other way. What kind of father does that make me? One who's learning and growing, I said, taking his hand. That's all any of us can do. We went to bed that night not knowing what the next day would bring. The battle lines had been drawn, but we were prepared for whatever came next. What we weren't prepared for was the phone call that came at 6:15 the next morning. It was Beth, her voice shaking. William's in the hospital. He had chest pains last night. It's not a heart attack, just angina, but it scared everyone. He's asking to see you and Emma. William's health scare changed the dynamic in ways I couldn't have predicted. Robert and I debated whether to visit the hospital and ultimately decided that Robert would go alone first to assess the situation. Emma was still asleep, and I wasn't willing to bring her into what might be another emotionally fraught situation. I'll go see how he is, Robert said, grabbing his keys. If it seems appropriate, maybe you and Emma can come later. I nodded, relieved that we were on the same page. Be careful, I warned. This could be a genuine olive branch, or it could be a manipulation tactic. Robert returned 3 hours later, his expression thoughtful. Dad's okay, he reported. The doctor says it was stress-induced angina. Not a heart attack, but definitely a warning sign. How is everyone behaving? I asked cautiously. Subdued, he replied. Mom was crying, of course. Thomas was pacing around like a caged animal. Beth looked exhausted. He paused. Dad asked about you and Emma. He seemed genuinely sorry you weren't there. I raised an eyebrow. Did he say that? Not in so many words, Robert admitted. But it was the first time he's ever actually asked about Emma's well-being. He wanted to know if her arm was better. This small sign of concern was unexpected. While I wasn't ready to assume it represented a real change of heart, it was at least an acknowledgement that Emma had been hurt. The hospital incident created a temporary ceasefire. No one called or texted demanding apologies or making accusations. It was as if everyone needed time to recalibrate after the shock. During this lull, I received an unexpected call from Emma's school. Mrs. Reynolds? This is Mrs. Patel, Jacob's teacher. Beth gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I was surprised but curious. Yes, of course. What can I help you with? Beth mentioned there have been some incidents between Jacob and Emma outside of school, she said carefully. I wanted you to know that we've been addressing similar behaviors here. Jacob has been having difficulty respecting other children's boundaries. She explained that they'd implemented a behavior plan for Jacob, But without support from home, progress was limited. Beth is on board with getting Jacob the help he needs, but she's mentioned that her husband and in-laws are resistant. This conversation confirmed what Beth had told me and added an important perspective. Jacob's behavior wasn't just a family issue, it was affecting his functioning at school as well. I thanked Mrs. Patel for reaching out and promised to keep her updated on our family's progress in addressing the situation. That evening, Robert received a text from Thomas that surprised us both. "Can we talk?" "Just us brothers. No wives." Robert looked at me questioningly. "Should I go?" I considered for a moment. "Yes, but be clear about where you stand. This isn't about taking sides against spouses. It's about doing what's right for the kids." Robert met Thomas at a bar near Thomas's office. When he returned, his expression was a mix of weariness and cautious optimism. "He's scared," Robert reported. "Dad's health scare made him realize how fragile everything is. And Jacob's teacher called him in for a conference yesterday. She showed him documentation of multiple incidents where Jacob hurt other kids. He can't deny it anymore." "How did he react?" I asked. "Defensive at first. Blamed the school, the other kids, Beth for coddling Jacob. But eventually, he admitted he's worried about his son." Robert sighed. "He asked me what we're doing with Emma that makes her so well-behaved. That's the first time he's ever acknowledged that Emma is doing well, not just too sensitive or too quiet." This was another small but significant shift. The family dynamics that had seemed set in stone for years were beginning to crack under the pressure of reality. The next day, Beth called me. "Thomas talked to Jacob's pediatrician," she said, her voice tense with restrained excitement. "We're getting a referral to a child psychologist. Thomas is actually on board." "What changed his mind?" I asked. "Your email, Dad's health scare, the school conference, all of it together. He finally had to face that this isn't just me being overprotective." She paused, and he saw the photo of Emma's bruise. That really hit him hard, seeing physical evidence of what Jacob did. 2 days after William came home from the hospital, Margaret called me directly. I braced myself for another confrontation, but her voice was subdued. "Hazel, I think we need to talk. All of us, together. Can you and Robert bring Emma over this weekend? William's feeling much better, and we have some things we need to discuss as a family." I was cautious. "Margaret, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be clear. We're not bringing Emma into a situation where she might be made to feel responsible for any of this." "I understand," she said, and to my surprise, she sounded sincere. "This isn't about placing blame. It's about figuring out how to move forward." After consulting with Robert, we agreed to meet at their house on Saturday afternoon, with the understanding that we would leave immediately if things became negative. We prepared Emma carefully, explaining that we were going to talk with her grandparents about making sure everyone treats each other kindly. "Will Jacob be there?" she asked, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. "No, sweetie," I assured her. "Just Grandma, Grandpa, Uncle Thomas, and Aunt Beth. And Dad and I will be with you the whole time." When we arrived at my in-laws' house, the atmosphere was noticeably different from our usual visits. Gone was the forced joviality that typically masked the undercurrents of criticism and comparison. Instead, there was a subdued tension, the kind that comes when people know difficult conversations lie ahead. William looked pale but composed, sitting in his usual armchair. Margaret had prepared a simple spread of coffee and store-bought cookies, unusual for her, as she typically made elaborate homemade treats that she would pointedly mention had taken all day. Thomas and Beth arrived shortly after us. Beth immediately came to greet Emma with genuine warmth, while Thomas hung back, looking uncomfortable. I noticed he couldn't quite look at Emma's arm, though the bruise had mostly faded. Margaret suggested that Emma might like to watch a movie in the den while the adults talked. I was about to object when Emma spoke up. "Can I stay?" she asked quietly. "You're going to talk about me and Jacob, right?" The adults exchanged glances. It was Robert who answered. Yes, sweetie, we are. But some of it might be grown-up talk that could be boring or confusing. Emma straightened her shoulders in a gesture so adult it made my heart ache. I want to stay. I promise I'll tell you if I want to leave. Robert looked at me, and I nodded. Emma deserved to be part of this conversation about her own safety and well-being. William cleared his throat. Well, I suppose we should get started. He looked directly at Emma, something he rarely did. Emma, your grandmother and I owe you an apology. We didn't listen to you when you were hurt, and we made you apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. That wasn't fair. Emma's eyes widened at this unexpected acknowledgement. She glanced at me, and I gave her an encouraging nod. Thank you, Grandpa, she said simply. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. When your grandfather had to go to the hospital, it made us think about what's really important. And hurting people's feelings or letting someone get hurt because of old-fashioned ideas, that's not what family should be about. Thomas spoke next, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Jacob's teacher has been trying to tell us for months that there are problems. I didn't want to hear it. It was easier to think everyone else was overreacting. He looked at Emma directly for the first time. I'm sorry he hurt you, Emma. And I'm sorry I didn't do anything about it sooner. Beth reached over and squeezed Thomas's hand, her relief at his acknowledgement evident. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were moments of defensiveness, particularly from Margaret, who struggled to let go of her boys will be boys mindset. William occasionally lapsed into justifications about how things were done in my day. But each time, someone, Robert, me, Beth, or even Thomas, gently redirected the conversation back to the core issue, the children's well-being. By the end of the afternoon, we had established some preliminary agreements. 1. Jacob would continue seeing the child psychologist Beth had found. 2. Any playtime between Jacob and Emma would be fully supervised for the foreseeable future. 3. Everyone agreed to a family session with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. 4. The adults would work on validating Emma's feelings and respecting her boundaries. 5. Physical aggression would never be dismissed as normal or acceptable. As we prepared to leave, Emma surprised everyone by approaching William's chair. I hope you feel better, Grandpa, she said, patting his hand gently. William's eyes glistened. Thank you, Emma. I'm already feeling much better. In the car on the way home, Emma was thoughtful. Are things going to be different now? She asked. Robert and I exchanged glances. We're going to try to make them different, I said honestly. Everyone has promised to work on treating each other with more kindness and respect. Even Jacob? Jacob is learning, Robert explained. Just like you learn math or reading at school, he needs to learn how to manage his feelings without hurting others. It might take some time. Emma nodded, accepting this explanation. I'm glad Grandma and Grandpa said sorry. That was hard for them. Out of the mouths of babes. Even at 7, Emma understood something profound about human nature, how difficult it is to admit when we're wrong, and how meaningful it is when we do. That night, as Robert and I discussed the day's events, he seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. I've spent my whole life trying to please my parents, he admitted, always feeling like I was second best after Thomas. Today was the first time I felt like I was doing the right thing, not just trying to keep the peace. I squeezed his hand. You stood up for your daughter. That matters more than anything. We stood up for her, he corrected. And somehow it brought the whole family to a better place. He shook his head in wonder. Who would have thought that setting boundaries would actually bring us closer together? The road ahead would not be smooth. I harbored no illusions about that. Years of established patterns wouldn't change overnight. But for the first time, I felt genuine hope that our extended family could evolve into something healthier for all of us, especially for the children. A week after our family meeting, Margaret called to invite us to lunch at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Just the 4 of us, she specified. You, Robert, William, and me. We'd like to talk more about moving forward. I agreed cautiously, still not entirely convinced that their change of heart was genuine or lasting. Robert was similarly skeptical but hopeful. Dad's health scare really shook them, he reminded me. Sometimes it takes something dramatic to make people reevaluate their priorities. We arranged for Emma to have a play date with her best friend from school, ensuring she wouldn't feel left out or anxious about the meeting. Before leaving, I reviewed our boundaries with Robert. We need to be united, I emphasized. No letting them minimize what happened or revert to old patterns. He nodded firmly. Agreed. This is too important to backslide on. The cafe Margaret had chosen was a neutral space, not their territory, not ours. It was a peaceful setting with well-spaced tables that offered privacy for conversation. When we arrived, Margaret and William were already seated, looking somewhat tense but composed. After ordering drinks, William took the lead, surprising me with his directness. We've been doing a lot of thinking since our meeting last week, he began. And we've realized that we've been, well, wrong about a number of things. Margaret nodded, twisting her napkin nervously. We come from a different generation, she added. When our boys were growing up, the approach to discipline and behavior was different. Boys were expected to be rough, and children were expected to work things out themselves. But that doesn't make it right, William interjected, placing his hand over Margaret's fidgeting ones. The world has changed, and frankly, maybe the old ways weren't as good as we like to remember. I glanced at Robert, seeing the surprise on his face mirroring my own. This level of self-reflection was unprecedented from his parents. Margaret continued, After you sent that email, Hazel, I was angry. I felt attacked and judged as a grandmother and as a mother. But then when William had his episode, her voice faltered. The doctor said it was stress-induced, William explained. And it made us think about what's really important. Not being right. Not maintaining some image of a perfect family. But actually being there for our family. All of our family. We've been reading some of those articles you sent, Margaret admitted. About children's development and the importance of boundaries. It's eye-opening. Thomas and Beth came over yesterday, William added. They told us that Jacob has started seeing a child psychologist. Dr. Rodriguez, I believe. Robert nodded. Beth mentioned that. How do you feel about it? There was a moment of hesitation before William answered. Initially, I thought it was an overreaction. In my day, children didn't need therapists unless something was seriously wrong. He sighed. But Jacob had another incident at school. He pushed a little girl who wouldn't let him use the computer during free time. The school called Thomas in for a conference. That must have been difficult for everyone, I said carefully. Margaret's eyes welled with tears. It was a wake-up call. Thomas was so upset. He said he didn't want Jacob to grow up thinking it was okay to hurt people to get his way. And he's right. What kind of future would that lead to? We realized we've been enabling behavior that could harm Jacob's future, William admitted. Not to mention hurting Emma and other children in the process. The conversation flowed more easily after these initial admissions. We discussed practical steps for moving forward, how to handle future family gatherings, how to support both children through this transition, how to rebuild trust between all family members. We'd like to try a supervised play date, Margaret suggested tentatively. When you feel Emma is ready, of course. We could all be present. You, Robert, Thomas, Beth, and both of us. Just a short visit to start rebuilding. I considered this carefully. I think that could work as long as we're all on the same page about intervention if needed. Emma needs to see that all the adults will protect her if necessary. Absolutely, William agreed quickly. No more looking the other way or making excuses. We also discussed the family therapy session that had been scheduled for the following month. Both Margaret and William expressed nervousness about it, but confirmed their commitment to attending. It won't be easy, Margaret acknowledged. Talking about feelings isn't something our generation was encouraged to do. It's not always easy for our generation either, Robert said with a small smile. But it's worth it. As we prepared to leave, Margaret reached across the table and took my hand, an unprecedented gesture. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said quietly. "You would have been justified in cutting us off after how we treated Emma. The fact that you're willing to work through this, it means everything." I squeezed her hand, feeling the first genuine connection we'd ever shared. "Family is worth fighting for," I said. "Even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." In the car on the way home, Robert was unusually quiet. "Are you okay?" I asked, reaching over to touch his arm. "I'm trying to process everything," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life believing I could never measure up to Thomas in my parents' eyes. That nothing I did was ever quite good enough. And now, suddenly, they're listening to us, taking our concerns seriously. It's disorienting." Family dynamics can be incredibly powerful, I observed. They shape how we see ourselves and how we interact with the world. Changing those patterns isn't easy. "No," he agreed, "but necessary." He glanced at me. "I'm proud of us. For standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable. For not accepting the status quo when it was hurting Emma." The following weekend, we attempted the supervised play date. We chose a public park with a playground, neutral territory where both children could have space if needed. Emma was nervous, but willing to try, especially after we assured her that all the adults would be watching closely and would step in immediately if any problems arose. Jacob arrived with Thomas and Beth, looking subdued. Beth had prepared him for the visit, explaining that he needed to be gentle and respectful. To everyone's surprise, it was Jacob who approached Emma first. "I'm sorry I pushed you and took your robot," he said, clearly rehearsed, but seemingly sincere. Dr. Rodriguez is helping me learn to use my words instead of my hands when I'm upset. Emma regarded him cautiously. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for saying sorry." The children played separately at first, with Emma staying close to me while Jacob explored the climbing structure with Thomas nearby. Gradually, they began to interact in small ways, taking turns on the slide, playing an impromptu game of Simon Says that Beth initiated. There was one tense moment when Jacob wanted to use the swing Emma was on. His face darkened with frustration, and I saw him clench his fists at his sides. But before any adult could intervene, he took a deep breath and said, "Can I have a turn when you're done?" Emma nodded, and I exchanged a glance with Beth, who looked both relieved and proud. It was a small victory, but a significant one. As the playdate came to an end, Margaret approached me. "This went better than I expected," she admitted. "It's a process," I reminded her. "There will be good days and difficult ones. The important thing is that we're all committed to making it work." She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about something you said in your email, about how we might have been doing Jacob a disservice by excusing his behavior. I didn't want to see it then, but you were right. Children need boundaries to feel secure. William and I thought we were being loving by letting Jacob do whatever he wanted, but really, we were setting him up for failure." This insight surprised me. "That's a profound realization, Margaret." "Well," she said with a small smile, "it turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks after all." On the drive home, Emma was thoughtful. "Jacob seemed different today," she observed. "How so?" Robert asked. "He used his words instead of grabbing or pushing. And he took turns without getting mad." She considered this for a moment. "Do you think he's going to stay that way?" "It's going to take time and practice," I explained. "Just like learning to ride a bike or read. He's learning new skills for managing his feelings and getting along with others. There might be times when he forgets or slips back into old habits. But it seems like he's trying, and that's a good start." Emma nodded, accepting this. "I'm glad everyone's helping him learn. It's not fun to be around someone who hurts you." "No, it's not," Robert agreed, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "And you never have to accept that from anyone." That evening, as we tucked Emma into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, why did Grandma and Grandpa let Jacob hurt me before? Didn't they love me?" My heart ached at the confusion in her voice. I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. They do love you, sweetie. But sometimes adults can have wrong ideas about how children should behave or how to handle problems. They thought they were doing the right thing, even though they weren't. Like when I thought 7 plus 8 was 14 on my math test, she suggested. I was really sure I was right, but I was wrong. I smiled at her simple but profound analogy. Exactly like that. And just like you learned the correct answer was 15, Grandma and Grandpa are learning better ways to handle situations with you and Jacob. She seemed satisfied with this explanation, snuggling deeper under her covers. I'm glad they're learning. It feels better when grown-ups keep you safe. That's our job, Robert said, bending to kiss her forehead. And we'll always do our best to keep you safe and make sure you're treated with respect. As we closed Emma's door, Robert pulled me into a hug. We did good, he whispered. Standing up for her, pushing for change, not accepting the status quo. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the truth of his words. We did. And we'll keep doing it, one day at a time. 1 month after the incident that changed everything, our family landscape had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been moments of backsliding, misunderstandings, and the occasional flare of old tensions. But the overall trajectory was undeniably positive. The first family therapy session had been challenging but productive. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, had a gift for creating a safe space where everyone could express their feelings without judgment. William struggled the most, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability required, but even he had made important admissions about his tendency to dismiss emotional concerns as weakness. In my family, showing emotions was considered a failing, he explained during our second session. My father believed that men should be stoic and women should be accommodating. I see now how that limited perspective has affected my relationships with my sons and grandchildren. Margaret had surprised everyone by embracing the therapy process wholeheartedly. I've spent decades trying to maintain this image of a perfect family, she confessed. Always comparing us to others, always pushing for achievements that would make us look good. I never stopped to consider if we were actually happy. The supervised playdates between Emma and Jacob continued, gradually increasing in duration as Jacob demonstrated more consistent control over his impulses. There had been setbacks, a tense moment over a board game when Jacob thought Emma was cheating, a brief regression when Jacob was overtired and grabbed a toy from Emma's hands. But unlike before, these incidents were addressed immediately and appropriately by all the adults present. Jacob's therapy was making a difference. Dr. Rodriguez had diagnosed him with ADHD and some difficulty with emotional regulation, but assured Thomas and Beth that with proper support, Jacob could learn to manage his impulses effectively. They had implemented a consistent structure at home with clear expectations and consequences, which was helping Jacob feel more secure. He's actually happier, Beth told me over coffee one afternoon. I was so afraid that setting firm boundaries would crush his spirit somehow. But he seems relieved to know exactly what the rules are and what happens if he breaks them. The unpredictability of our previous approach was actually making his behavior worse. Emma had blossomed over the past month. The wary, hesitant child who was always looking over her shoulder was being replaced by a more confident, expressive little girl. She still had moments of uncertainty around Jacob, but she was learning to speak up for herself in a way that made me incredibly proud. Jacob, I don't want to play that game right now, I overheard her saying during a recent visit. We can play what you want after I finish this drawing. This simple assertion would have been unthinkable a month ago, when Emma believed her wants and needs were less important than keeping the peace. Robert had grown too, finding his voice in his family in a way he never had before. He no longer defaulted to appeasing his parents or brother when conflicts arose. Instead, he stated his position calmly but firmly, maintaining boundaries while still showing love and respect. I never realized how much energy I was expending trying to keep everyone happy, he told me one night. Always walking on eggshells, always mediating, always compromising my own values to avoid rocking the boat. It's exhausting to live that way. And now? I asked. He smiled. Now I'm just trying to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. It's actually much simpler. Our marriage had strengthened through this challenge. The united front we presented wasn't just for show. We had developed a deeper understanding of each other's values and priorities. We communicated more openly about difficult topics, no longer avoiding potential conflicts out of fear they might damage our relationship. The most profound transformation, however, was in the relationship between the generations. Margaret and William were making genuine efforts to connect with Emma on her terms, asking about her interests, listening to her stories, respecting her boundaries. They still occasionally slipped into old patterns of comparison or dismissiveness, but they caught themselves more quickly and made amends. Thomas and Beth had become unexpected allies in maintaining the new family dynamic. We've been enabling toxic patterns for years, Thomas admitted during a conversation with Robert. It was easier to go along with Mom and Dad's favorites game than to challenge it. I'm sorry for the role I played in that. Jacob and Emma were developing a cautious friendship based on their shared interests in space and drawing. It wasn't the instant cousin bond that Margaret had always envisioned, but it was authentic and developing at its own pace. During our most recent family dinner, now held at a restaurant to neutral territory, I watched Emma showing Jacob how to draw a rocket ship. He was listening attentively, occasionally asking questions, but never grabbing the pencil or trying to take over. It was a small moment, but it represented enormous growth for both children. They're going to be okay, aren't they? Margaret asked softly, following my gaze. I think so, I replied. Children are remarkably resilient when they have the right support. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been reading that book you recommended about generational patterns. It's illuminating. So many things I did with my sons were exactly what my mother did with me, even though I promised myself I'd be different. Awareness is the first step to change, I reminded her. We can't transform patterns we don't recognize. True, she agreed. I just wish I'd realized sooner. Before the damage was done? I suggested gently. She nodded, eyes glistening. Yes, it's never too late to heal relationships, I assured her. Look at how far we've all come in just a month. Later that evening, as we prepared for bed, Robert brought up something that had been on my mind as well. Do you think we would have reached this point if you hadn't sent that email? If you hadn't taken such a definitive stand? I considered the question carefully. Honestly? No. I think we would have continued in the same dysfunctional pattern indefinitely. Everyone was too invested in maintaining the status quo, even though it was hurting all of us in different ways. Including Jacob, Robert noted. He was learning that he could hurt others without consequences. What kind of future would that have created for him? Exactly. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we love is to hold them accountable, even when it's uncomfortable. He pulled me close. Thank you for having the courage to do that. For Emma, for all of us. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected on the journey of the past month. The incident that had seemed so devastating at the time, finding Emma hurt and being dismissed by my in-laws, had ultimately become a catalyst for profound positive change. By refusing to accept the unacceptable, by standing firm in my boundaries, I had helped create space for healing and growth that benefited everyone, even those who initially resisted. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. We would continue to navigate challenges as they arose, continue to work on communication and boundaries, continue to prioritize the well-being of all the children in our family. But the foundation had been laid for healthier relationships built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics or outdated expectations. I thought about Emma's words from earlier that day, spoken with the simple wisdom of a 7-year-old. It's better when everyone is kind, even when they disagree. Indeed it is. And sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to remind us of that fundamental truth. If you've ever had to stand up for your child against family pressure or set difficult boundaries with loved ones, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. How did you navigate that challenging territory? What helped you stay strong when it would have been easier to back down? Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share with someone who might need encouragement to hold firm in their own boundaries. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, protecting our children is always worth the discomfort of confrontation. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.